This is the continuation of the Finance and Strategic Planning Committee meeting for November 18th. I hate to be the bearer of bad news to the folks in the audience, but it is still the afternoon on our clock. We dealt with a number of items, but we had to skip over some others which we are coming back to at present, and then we'll get on to the evening agenda. So that begins with item 6F. I will get to declaration when we get to that part of the agenda. That's how, when I call for declaration and pecuniary interest, that's how you know we'll have hit the evening. So we start with item 6F, which was the Parkland Dedication Bylaw and Policy Extension. Staff are available for any questions. Are there questions? Councillor Vasic.
Through you, Chair Henry, I just have a few concerns I wanted to express about this. Well, I understand that it's complicated. Balancing economic development with other community priorities, and I understand that an incentive to development in the Uptown is important in order to address concerns that if we don't have incentives, then we aren't going to have affordable housing. But this policy has been in existence for 5 years, and the housing prices have skyrocketed, and I'm not sure that this policy puts affordable housing in jeopardy, but I do think it could put parkland in jeopardy, particularly given Bill 108 changes that are going to be coming up, and that extending this policy, we might put parkland funds at a disadvantage. And while we will be able to meet the current needs, as I understand it from staff, I'm concerned about what would happen with the forthcoming parkland strategy. And parks are a top issue. We saw in the asset management report that 72% of people who responded said they visit parks more than once a week. It's a top concern for people in my ward. Next to traffic calming, it's actually surpassed leaf collection. And parks within a walking distance supports efforts to mediate climate change, and we just passed the climate emergency declaration, and so having parks in walking distance means you don't have to drive. So I have concerns about this, and if it were to pass, what I would ask if it could, the recommendation is just a bit unclear to me. Sorry, I'm not on the right page here. I'm trying to go fast. I know we want to get through this. So just the piece around this being approved for a 5-year term, and then saying that we direct staff to report back to council prior to December 2024 for an update and further direction. So just that language particularly can be confusing. So even if we have to drop everything for Bill 108 and revise, this might actually say, no, we don't. It's just not clear. So being explicit about that. So one, I'm not totally sure I support this. And two, if it were to pass, I would want some more explicit language around the date for update and review. Thanks.
Through you, Chair Henry. Certainly with respect to the recommendations and coming back to council, the intention there was that once all of the regulations and Bill 108, is put forward by the province and enacted, then we would come back and give an update as to how this fits and sort of where we need to go with respect to Bill 108 at that point in time.
Brett.
Yes, so through Chair Henry, to follow up to Councillor Vasic's question around PUB funding within the capital budget. So right now, everything within the proposed capital budget that will be released in December can be funded by the PUB existing balance and then continuation of PUB revenue. What we don't know, obviously, is the implications of Bill 108. All indication is that we'll be revenue neutral. However, that's fully yet to be understood what that means. What this is looking to do is maintain the current exemption for the Uptown as it exists right now. And so even with factoring that in under the current framework, we would be able to collect enough PUB to fund all the planned projects. What this recommendation is trying to state is that should Bill 108 do something different, so for example, if Bill 108 were to exempt parkland maybe in larger area than just uptown across the entire city, it would in essence override whatever we approved today. So it was meant to say we're looking to extend this program for a 5-year period, the current program, but if Bill 108 basically has other rules in terms of how parkland's treated, that we'll need to report back to council and in essence potentially change what this exemption means for uptown, and it might mean a larger exemption across the entire city. So all we were trying to do is extend the current program for a 5-year period based on the current rates for industrial, residential, and commercial within the uptown boundaries. So hopefully that helps clarify the recommendations.
Yeah, I'll look for a mover and seconder. If further question? Okay, but let's get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor V, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Question from Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Henry, I was just wondering, how did you consult with the Parks team when putting this forward? Mm-hmm.
So originally, back in 2014, we would have consulted with the Parks group on the bylaw. This time around, it was really just a straightforward extension. So we really we had some, a few conversations, but it wasn't a formal consultation with really any of the other departments other than finance and planning. To make sure that there was enough money in the budget to continue to do what Parks plans to do. So with this continuing forward, we knew that it wasn't going to impact any of their projects. So we really kind of viewed this as a fairly straightforward, simple process to move this forward as the clock's kind of ticking on it right now.
Okay. Are there any comments? The item's been moved and seconded. Before I call the vote. Seeing no comments. All those in favor? All those opposed? That's Councillor Vasic and Councillor Bonagor.
I was still on actually, no, I'll be.
Okay. Okay. Next up, item G, Carnegie Library 2019 funding release. Any questions on this item? Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Henry. It's more just a question of the potential use of this building, given that it's looking like a sizable investment to, keep this historic building in usable and, healthy shape. I'd love to see if there could be some kind of public access to the building as well. So is that something that you're considering when you're looking at potential uses for the building?
Yes, absolutely. So we're about to engage in a process of formally looking for a tenant, and we will be coming to council for some input on exactly kind of what council would like to see in the space and what opportunities we have going forward. It's the zoning and the opportunity there is fairly flexible. So there's an opportunity for all sorts of different potential users, corporate users, and others as well. So
a little while ago, Pam Patel from Empty Space and the Impact Festival, she came and delegated to council, and she mentioned a group in Toronto, the Theatre Centre, which is based in a Carnegie Library, and it's a live arts incubator. So I was wondering if you could kind of put a call into them while you're shopping around for potential uses.
Yep, we will make every effort to cover all the bases in terms of tenancy, for sure.
Through you, Chair Henry, happy to support this because it's a beautiful building and we really need to retain it. But I would also like to follow up by asking staff if we could have a report or an update in the near future on where we are with getting an elevator into our Button Factory, which is public space, which is a heritage building, and I know it's on the radar, but if I could ask staff for an update on that sooner than later. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so through Chair Henry to Councillor Veith, there'll be some information as part of the budget release on December 9th, so not to let all of that out of the bag today, but stay tuned on December 9th.
And to confirm this is funding release, a tender for all of this would still come back to council, correct? Okay. Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Chair Henry. So it's a significant amount of money to invest into this building, and one of the things that's been highlighted in the packet is that and I'm really just looking for clarification on this. Currently, the building is not really tenantable, for lack of a better word, and the investment that we're putting into this building is going to lead us into a position where we will be able to find a tenant, whether that's something that we're looking to do from a city initiative or whether it's a private business that's going into the building. So because it's been vacant for a long period of time does not necessarily mean that we're going to have a hard time finding a tenant, particularly once we put these upgrades into the building. Is that fair to say?
Through you, Chair Henry, yes, you are correct. By investing in improvements to this building makes it a much more desirable building for people who are looking to locate their business or operation.
And then I just had a follow-up question through you, Chair Henry. Are we going to be able to, excuse me, put anything with respect to celebrating some of the heritage behind the building, sort of the history behind the building, plaques, signage, sort of explaining what this building is? Because, like Councillor Veith says, it's a beautiful building, and I think we need to sometimes do a little bit of a better job highlighting some of that stuff.
Through you, Chair Henry, our heritage folks aren't sitting here with us right now, but I know they are very keenly involved in the project and are very excited about kind of where the project goes. So I'm sure they'll have some interesting ideas about how to celebrate the history of the building for sure.
Seeing no further questions, I don't think I have it on the floor. Can I get someone to move this item? Moved by Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Bonagor. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Next up, I believe we dealt with item I. Did we? Okay, yeah. Item J. Any questions on early approval of capital projects? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Vasic. All those in favor? That's carried. Page. We dealt with item K, and I believe we dealt with item L. That takes us to item M, award of RFT 19-15, new splash pad and washroom, Waterloo Park West. Staff are available for questions from council. That's why it's still here. Councillor Bonagor? You do not? Okay. Oh, you got it. Okay. Any questions on this item? Okay. Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Henry, I was just hoping that you could clarify how what exactly is going to be included in the funding right now, and what are the possible inclusions at a later date.
Through you, Chair Henry, the base bid included the actual splash pad itself and the washroom building, seating, shade trees. Most of the elements there, we added some provisional items to allow us to award the bid, depending on the prices that came in. So the shade structure, the permanent shade structure is going to be in the bid, and the shade sails, as well as increased size and diameter of a new water supply line from Father David Bauer Drive, so that we have more function in the splash pad itself. A couple of items that are still bid on but not being awarded at this time, still provisional items, is the Moloch waste containers. There's 2 of those, and then there's a pathway that runs between the Bauer lot and the future splash pad that makes a connection. It's not integral to the new splash pad at all, but it's something that we could potentially add later, depending on how any other additional costs that we encounter throughout the construction process.
Helpful clarification. Moved, I assume, by Councillor Bonagor, seconded by Councillor Freeman. And I told staff I would note this earlier. The Section 37 funding that comes through here came from projects in Northdale. So when you splash with your kids, thank a student. With that, all those in favor? Carried. Next item is the item N, Rim Park Ball Diamond Pavilion. Staff are available for questions. Questions from Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Henry. It was just a general background question. So overall, this pavilion is tagged at almost $1 million, if I'm reading all the documents correctly. Can you please just remind us, like, who will be using it? What is the need, and what kind of need are we meeting with this kind of facility?
Yeah, this is primarily for pavilion for the soccer uses, and it will be given to Parks and Environment, and the uses are primarily soccer uses.
I think Councillor Freeman has further information.
Through you, Chair Henry. Yeah, so these are the soccer pitches and the baseball diamonds that are located not near the building at Rim Park, so they're on the east side, and so right now there isn't washroom facilities on the east side, and so this will be a real value-added piece. The nice thing about this design is the fact that the washrooms, they're like just single washrooms, and they're not designated for any particular gender, and so I think that it makes that whole space a lot more functional. I like that you made it smaller, that you're bringing it in to the budget, which is really important. I like how you've maintained the tree going through the canopy. There's an old abandoned silo base, so they can use that silo base to plant a nice tree and let it grow through that canopy, which will create natural shade that is not present in that space at all, which I really like. And I think it's really smart that we're roughing in the other spaces, so that they can be used in the future, like when budget allows, to come back to this and add to it. So I don't know if that helps, but it's on the hospice side. So then I think it'll help bring people, kind of keep people into the site, shall we say, instead of driving in and out to go to a convenience store or something. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think, that's one of the pieces we got in the asset management framework as well, was around places to pee, and that's been a topic of conversation. I think this is important. Okay, question from Councillor Freeman.
So the change to cross-laminated timber, is that going to help on some emissions reductions? Like, is the process for CLT less emission intensive?
I believe so, but I don't really have the answer yet. That's what I think. It's going to reduce the emission or the process was,
It at least has embedded carbon, which sequesters it during the construction, so that part's useful. Would you like to move that item, Councillor Freeman? Seconded by Councillor Bodley. Any further discussion on it? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. And that takes us to an exciting report we won't have the time for tonight to really dive into it, but we'll take questions on it from Council. The Energy Conservation and Demand Management Plan. Sunda is available for questions from Council on this item. Councillor Bonagor, Councillor Bodley, Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Henry. It's really just a question about one of the proposals here, which is the corporate energy manager. I'm just wondering where in the corporate structure that position is proposed to sit.
That's a good question, but right now it will likely fall under facilities design corporates under that structure, but that position will be a link to the corporate. It will act like a business manager to sort of work with the financial person.
Because I'm just wondering that by being this explicit in like kind of positioning this role before we actually have our corporate climate action plan written, I'm just wondering how are we meant to be lining up these dominoes?
This is the corporate action plan, and our report on this energy conservation and demand management plan. They are going to go hand in hand. Actually, the primary reason for the energy conservation and demand management plan has got three folds. One is to meet the provincial requirement, and the second one is to track our records of what we have been emitting or releasing, and the third one is to see how that can be reduced. So how that can be reduced is the third piece, is going to go hand in hand with the climate emergency action plan, and which will help, or the policy that has been created last year is a green energy, green building policy that is already has a target level which is 80% reduction by 2015. So the work has been, or the goal has been set, but the resources and the detailed plan for that is to be set through the budget process, and this climate action plan or emergency plan is timely to sort of come into play. So where the resources and the funding can be put in line to sort of meet this.
So if I'm understanding correctly, should the corporate climate action plan suggest a senior team member to kind of embed it across all departments, this is the person who would be working with that?
Yeah. I think that's a right way of saying, because the climate action plan is not confining to our business model, which is primarily to look after only the city facilities. I think climate action plan is internal and external for the community as well as for the city. So that's the right way of saying it, I think. Yes.
Further information from Commissioner Dijkstra?
Yeah, through the chair to the councillor, just to give some light to upcoming budget documents coming forward to council, strategic initiatives across the corporation, and position requirement around a strategic director to support that. We see leveraging this position, but more so that position helping across all the boundaries with the strategic initiatives that council's been directing us in alignments with our plan moving forward.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we weren't putting the cart before the horse as we're kind of working out how we should be implementing this kind of stuff. So I appreciate the information. Thank you.
And it's all premised on us being able to get some funding too, Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Henry. So thank you for this report. I know that we didn't delve deep into it, but I think one of the really important things is, and I've said this to Sunda and his team in the past, I don't think I've ever said it in the council chambers, but I've always said to them, bring me, if you've got a project that's going to fundamentally reduce our emissions, help us save energy, and we have to front some capital to make it happen, so that and if the payback is, like, if the return on that investment is 5 years or less, we're missing the boat if we don't seize the opportunity. And I think that this report is starting to get to that. And then we effectively approve that tonight with regard to the Waterloo Rec Center. And I remember when we had the conversation about putting a PV array on a barrel roof, and the consultant was pretty excited to have the chance to do it. So not only are we, we're kind of walking the talk, because I'm really keen to see how quickly that array pays off, given how much the cost for solar has come down. So it's I think that the work that you're doing is going to be a significant chunk of our efforts to get to 80% by 2050 or lower.
Okay. Comment noted. Any further questions or comments from council on this item? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Bodley. And I'll note, for the benefit of staff on this, one of the things embedded in the report that I think is actually just as critical, if not more critical, than concepts around a carbon budget is the internal cost of carbon. Recognizing that it's more than just the $20 or $30 a ton that is the baseline set by the federal government. but that there are social and other costs that when you consider those, it can really drive some action. So it was good to see that in there. I know it requires further investigation and thought by staff, which is the direction we have in front of us. But I was excited to see that there, and I know that it's important. So seeing that, I'll take the vote. All those in favor? That's carried. So that takes us through the afternoon. It is now the evening. I will look on item 8 for disclosure of pecuniary interests and the general nature thereof. Councillor Freeman?
Yeah, I'll be declaring with regard to item 9A with respect to family members that own property on the street in question.
And Councillor Reith?
I also will declare pecuniary interest on item 9A for the same reasons as Councillor Freeman.
Fun fact, it's the same relative. That's public information. Okay. So as they exit, that brings us to item 9, delegations, and up we have Roosevelt Avenue reconstruction around sidewalks. We have Howard Armitage and Marie Wolf, both residents of Waterloo, to present to council.
Good evening, Mayor Jaworski, councillors, and staff. My name is Howard Armitage, and I'm here today with my neighbor Marie Wolf, representing the residents of approximately 80 homes on Roosevelt Avenue and its adjacent crescents. Provided to council members earlier should be 2 documents, a written brief and the accompanying petition containing signatures. As noted in the brief, we have over 95% support for the petition that we have submitted to you. Many of the residents who signed the petition are in the chamber this evening. In the few minutes allotted to us, I will explain why we are here, provide the arguments supporting our petition, and highlight possible alternative solutions to the city's current plan for Roosevelt Avenue. But first, let me introduce you to our neighbor. If we were to travel west on Herb Street from Westmount Road, just before arriving at Fisher Holman Drive, you would see Roosevelt Avenue on your left-hand side. Roosevelt serves as the road that connects Herb with Warrington. There are 4 cul-de-sacs that connect to Roosevelt. Thank you. This neighborhood of single-family detached homes has often been characterized as one of the best kept secrets in Waterloo, and as a countryside setting in the middle of a city. In its current form, the street has a unique appeal to those who live here and to those who walk, bike, or drive through this attractive, safe street. So why are we here? The issue came to a head when residents reviewed the city's most recent proposal to complete road reconstruction and infrastructure replacement on Roosevelt. Councillors, believe me when I say residents universally applaud the initiative to make needed repairs to the road's surface and infrastructure, particularly on the older section of the road. However, there is an overwhelming resident opposition to the scope of work that includes the installation of a concrete sidewalk and grass boulevard that will not only result in a narrowing of the road, but also significantly reduce the safety and ambience that is a feature and highlight of the street. Many residents attended the public information meeting on September 12th to learn more about the project details and to express their concern with the sidewalk proposal. While we appreciate the time and effort made by the city to hold this meeting, we did not have an opportunity to engage in the planning process, and consequently, our concerns were not incorporated into the decision-making process. This is when the conversation in the neighborhood began to accelerate, capturing the attention of more and more people and leading to the petition and subsequent request to present to council. As can be seen by the signatures on the petition, there is a very strong objection to the sidewalk proposal. However, the tone of the conversation has been one of optimism, where the reconstruction of Roosevelt Avenue is seen as an opportunity to use new technology, approaches, and ideas that satisfy planning needs, showcase the best that the city of Waterloo has to offer, and maintain the warmth and unique qualities of a neighborhood that exemplifies pride of ownership, a sense of place within a beautiful canopy of older trees, the demographic that has always seen strollers, young children, seniors, and people of varying abilities enjoying a walkable neighborhood on a wide, safe street. To our knowledge, there has never been a safety issue or an accessibility or disability issue that prevents anyone from using or moving through Roosevelt in its current form. Let me now provide specific arguments against the scope of work that contains the sidewalk proposal. The first argument is that a sidewalk that narrows the street will alter the safety and ambience of the neighborhood. Reducing the road to 7 meters from the current width of 8.5 to 9 meters will impact the experience of walkers, runners, and hikers. Space for two-way traffic and parking will be substantially reduced. The sidewalk is seen by residents as an unnecessary intrusion that reduces common area road space, impacts existing landscaping, creates needless congestion by the narrowing of the road, and degrades the natural beauty of the neighborhood. It also reduces safety for cyclists. Narrower roads lead to shorter sightlines and reduced buffer space, which increases risks for cyclists. For the past half-century plus, Roosevelt has safely functioned as a shared space roadway with equal rights to vehicle and non-vehicle users. By narrowing the road and introducing a sidewalk, you create a hierarchy for transportation with more emphasis on vehicles and less on safe, active transportation. This creates a safety issue where there was not one previously. In its current form, Roosevelt Avenue is a road that works, providing safe, active transportation for all stakeholders. It's successfully shared by walkers of all abilities, runners, strollers, dogs, school buses, wheelchairs, and delivery vehicles. Our neighborhood has achieved this without intervention from the city or intentional design principles being applied. It is a space where built form and nature coexist in harmony. A sidewalk will narrow the street and completely alter the naturally occurring principles of safety and shared space that are currently a feature of the neighborhood. The seasonal issue of leaf removal is a 6 to 8 week issue in our neighborhood. Snow removal is another 3 to 4 month issue that also adds to the congestion and concern posed by a narrow road. When looking at the pictures on this slide, please consider what will happen when 1.5 meters of road is lost and what the road looks like with snowbanks on both sides. A second argument against the narrowing of Roosevelt is the critical issue of the number of cars currently parked on the apartment at the intersection of Herb Street and Roosevelt. This parking already extends up the street on both sides. If the street is narrowed, parking will only be possible on one side of the street, and these vehicles will have nowhere else to park but further up the street in front of residents' homes. The proposed narrower street will also add to a very difficult turning lane for school buses. At present, the number of cars in front of the apartment prevent easy access to Roosevelt Avenue from Herb, particularly when another vehicle is exiting from Roosevelt Avenue onto Herb Street. We have learned that alterations will be made to the current parking capacity, which will only add to the number of cars parked on Roosevelt Avenue. Third, there are several economic and environmental arguments we could make that question the logic of a seemingly significant dollar and environmental expense that is neither appreciated nor felt needed by the residents. Time doesn't permit us to elaborate on these in this council meeting. However, they are all fully contained in the brief that you have received. A final concern is as follows. If the sidewalk project goes ahead, it's apparent that the city expects to assign the responsibility for snow removal to the homeowners. There are two major issues here. First, from an environmental perspective, production of concrete is one of the largest contributors to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This fact, plus the additional use of snow blowers and salt to maintain the sidewalk, will increase overall costs and negative impacts on the environment. This is not consistent with a city that believes we are in the midst of a climate emergency. Second, as Council is aware, there are legal implications. Residents will resist this transfer of responsibility since we are aware that other cities such as Niagara Falls, Barrie, London, and Guelph are themselves taking care of clearing their municipality sidewalks. On Roosevelt, the sidewalk inclusion may involve up to 500 to 900 square feet of additional maintenance to be borne by residents of varying age, health, and capabilities. If this proceeds, we will argue that this task should be a city responsibility and expense rather than a responsibility and expense borne by the residents. However, why create this tension in the first place when it only adds to resident frustration and city cost? Let me summarize our concerns with the following table. What you are looking at is a modified template used by the City of Waterloo to measure the success of its many projects. Please note that on the left it contains 4 key performance measurement categories: social, natural, and economic environment, and technical aspects. We thought it would be constructive for council members to see how Roosevelt residents perceive the merits of the sidewalk proposal. As can be seen in the green column, our neighborhood without the sidewalk meets the individual criteria. As can be seen in the second predominantly yellow column, the sidewalk inclusion is seen to detract from our naturally occurring principles of safety and shared space. We feel this is an important factor for council to consider. Our final request to council is that we jointly examine alternative proposals. Our neighborhood believes that the residents of Roosevelt Avenue and adjacent crescents can work together in a manner consistent with Waterloo's reputation as one of the world's most intelligent communities and as a smart city to come up with creative solutions to reconstruction projects that encourage shared places, traffic calming, and low speed limits while ensuring safety, sustainability, and environmental protection. Other municipalities have created safe shared spaces without sidewalks. We have examined the types of solutions adopted by a number of mid-sized US cities, and we're happy to provide these references to council and staff. We've also seen the willingness of our own city to adopt or accept alternative approaches to road reconstruction. Examples include the absence of sidewalks in Colonial Acres, University Avenue shared facilities, and the Dutch Woonerf principle that's currently being considered for Larch Street in Waterloo. Our purpose in mentioning these is not to suggest a specific solution. Rather, it is to suggest that working together, we can arrive at an acceptable solution that does not require the installation of a sidewalk or the narrowing of Roosevelt Avenue. In summary, we believe a more creative, safe, and environmentally friendly solution can be developed that meets the city's requirements for accessibility without compromising the core of what residents have come to love about the Roosevelt Avenue ambience and culture. The current City of Waterloo policy appears to be following a standard approach that demands that every reconstruction require a sidewalk, whether it is the best solution or not. We believe a smart city can do better than this when its residents so strongly oppose it. Council is elected to represent the needs and interests of constituents. What is authentic engagement if not a duty to listen to the concerns of our community? We therefore ask that no decision regarding the sidewalk be made without first engaging Roosevelt neighborhood residents in a meaningful consultation. And by that, We are referring to the City of Waterloo Council meeting of September 23rd that discussed an inclusive model for public engagement and participation. On behalf of the residents in our neighborhood, Marie, I, and all our community in attendance tonight, thank you for allocating time to hear our voices, our concerns, and perspectives, and we're certainly open to any questions that you might have for us. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Howard. And before I turn to council, I just wanted to confirm it was both you and Marie that were listed, but this was the presentation. There isn't.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to confirm that because it wasn't clear to me on my sheet.
Marie was my backup if I lost my voice.
Fair enough. I didn't want to skip over someone that was expecting to speak. I think that would be highly unfortunate. Are there questions for the delegations from my colleagues on council? We'll certainly have an opportunity for staff.
Comment to the delegation.
Okay.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. Thank you very much for the presentation and outlining clearly the concerns that you have. So those are being well heard, and I also appreciate the number of residents that have joined you tonight. It's been a while since we've had this many people in council, so thank you for taking time to do that. I do have some questions for staff, so I will hold those till then.
Fair enough. Are there questions for the delegate? Councillor Bonagore.
Through you, Chair Henry. I'd also like to thank everyone coming here tonight. I was doing a lot of additional research on the weekend about sidewalks in suburban areas around the world and across the continent. I do appreciate what you're saying. I do have some concerns though, and I'd like to find out a bit more about the experience on the street. My main concerns and queries are really about who feels safe, and can people feel safe at all times? Even if this were to become a shared street, I mean, the best research says the whole street would need to be redesigned anyway to make cars a guest, essentially, in a shared space that puts people in the front and center, and the current situation doesn't do that. But if we were to even consider this, I think the whole street would be vastly different from what you might be expecting anyway. But yeah, as I said, my concerns are really about inclusion and accessibility, and I'm wondering if you've got residents on the street who use wheelchairs or whose children use mobility devices, how do they navigate getting around at dusk, at night, in the winter, at all those difficult times?
Thank you for the question. First, in response to your idea that the street may change, we recognize that. That's part of the reason that we want to work with the city to explore alternatives. And some of those alternatives are just on the screen that we're talking about right now. With respect to accessibility and safety, first of all, I could just look at the audience that are here. Many of these folks are elderly. Many of these folks have young children. They've all signed a petition with respect to the idea that Roosevelt is currently designed as a safe street and meets the criteria that I think the city would like to see happening in terms of accessibility and disability. With respect to your specific question, are there residents that have used the street with a mobile device? I don't mean a mobile device on the phone, clearly, but the answer has been yes. And in some cases, we've seen other areas where those same individuals, rather than use a sidewalk that is there, actually prefer the street because of the bump, bump, bump that exists in the sidewalk. They're feeling more comfortable on the side of the road. So I think the answer to your question is yes in both cases.
And to one of your points as well, I understand that as a council we need to consider constituents today, but we also need to be thinking of constituents in the future. So that's where we are looking at things like including sidewalks in our plans. It's really to build a network of safe transit for every kind of, every person, every mode. So that's where that policy comes from.
Understood.
So I just want to kind of make that clear as well.
Don't take your cue by looking at me. I'm one of the older residents. This community has a lot of young people who will be there a very long time and recognize the fact that we have a unique area that is safe, it is shared, and we don't want to see that change. Thank you.
Other questions for the delegate from members of council. I know there are questions for staff. You certainly, I'll say more later, but Howard, I appreciate you coming forward and assembling, I think, a large collection of views in an efficient way.
I didn't assemble, they volunteered.
Oh, it's been assembled, and that no matter, you can volunteer all you want, but it still takes work to be able to put that together. In fact, it often takes more work through volunteering than in other ways. So I appreciate that, and I know we've got questions for staff based on comments that you've raised. I think that's where we should go next. So I appreciate that coming up. So I'll turn first to Councillor Hanmer for questions of staff.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry, I really have two sets of questions. One, it piqued my curiosity around the plans and are we indeed having to take some of the property to be able to put, if the sidewalk is going through, to make the sidewalk work. And the second group, because they can all relate and you can decide how you want to answer them, is did we consider or have we considered any other alternatives to keeping it as a street that can be used by multiple forms of transportation and including walking and the safety? And then the second is, how far along are we in the project, and is there opportunity to take a look at alternatives?
Through you, Councillor Henry. If I get some of these wrong, let me know. Number one, property needed. No, there's no property that's required. The second question, I think, was, did we look at other alternatives? And before we even got to the 30% design, we knew when this even came up, this is a unique street. I recognize everything you've said about it. It's beautiful. The landscaping's beautiful, the mature trees. So we knew that we'd have to be careful when we did our road design to try to protect and preserve these features. So we looked at, we discussed options, and then we functionally looked at 4 different alternatives in terms of what side of the street the sidewalk should go on, the width of the bullet. We looked at different alternatives and did an analysis, and that's how we came up with the solution that was presented at the PIC on September 12th, which we felt was the best balance between the least amount of impact. And I should note that we walked the street with the city arborist, and he doesn't feel that what we're proposing should impact any mature trees. There are 2 city trees that were planted in the boulevard that may need to be removed, but they're not doing well, and he said he wasn't concerned about those. There's always things that could come up, more trees could come, you never know what's under the ground, but we don't anticipate, based on the design, any impact. So that was something right from the beginning that we were very concerned with. So the other thing with the design, the old school, the approach to this design was, in the 60s, 70s, was car-centric. Get cars from A to B as fast as we can, as efficiently as we can. That approach has obviously been evolving and changing to where we are now, where we're looking at the complete streets or shared streets. And really what that means, and it's looking at the right-of-way as a shared space for all users, from pedestrians to the I think you know this through the TMP, pedestrians first, then cyclists, then the transit, then vehicles. So to really truly give that pedestrians that safe feel, you need the defined space for each of those parties, because the reality is that cars and pedestrians, when cars are traveling at speeds and pedestrians, they don't go well together. So we need to give them that defined space. So although we're putting the sidewalk in, we've really narrowed a lot of the other things. And although I heard the comments about the narrowed street, this is something else that's coming more and more with design, with transportation, that these wide streets, and speaking of, with regards to climate change and funding, we don't need all this asphalt either. And by narrowing the street where there's not lots of transportation, you're forcing traffic calming. That's one of the best forms of traffic calming, is to narrow a street. Yes, people need to slow down to get around the cars, but they shouldn't be zipping through there. And if you gave them a wide street and put a parked car on it, they can whip around that car a lot easier than they could if they feel crunched and narrow. The street will still function and work. People just have to drive slower, and that's okay in a neighborhood like this. So that 7 meters isn't something that we've never done before and that other cities aren't doing. It's actually becoming more and more common practice that we're narrowing the street. The other thing I want to add to the design process and looking at the alternatives, it's supported through, well, the city council approved policy for sidewalk implementation, the new strategic plan in terms of one of the pillars was safe, sustainable transportation, as well as we reviewed with our transportation operations group who were supportive of this, WACAT, GRAC, and the school board. The school board actually, there's up to 30 kids that may use this route, and they were very supportive of putting a sidewalk in here. And with regards to the buses, the turning radiuses will be designed to ensure that buses can safely navigate those turning radiuses. So that is something that's being taken into consideration in the design. With regards to the apartment, the sidewalk will allow us to put a proper entrance in, eliminate that. It is very safe with the way the cars are parking in front, and there's no defined space for that right now. It just merges into the right-of-way. So this gives us an opportunity to make that a defined space. This is the city's right-of-way. This is where the people who are walking are going. People aren't, and now they have a defined access for driving. So I feel the design also improves the safety of that greatly.
Just interject for 1 second here, if I could. I truly believe, and I think the residents do as well, that you're providing a solution to a problem that simply does not exist. This street works well now as a shared street, as a safe street. We have not had issues. By narrowing the road, you are creating safety issues. You mentioned before, Carolyn, that when this was presented to the residents, that's how it was presented. There was no engagement on the part of residents to provide some of our input to how we might make this a more important initiative.
So I want to clarify, rules of procedure and decorum in council, and I probably should have done that up front, I think, because that would help. In terms of the order of procedure, we took delegation and input and had questions for those, and then at the end of that, that sort of ended the delegation opportunity, and now it's in the hands of council to ask with staff. So this isn't an opportunity for a back and forth in conversation. This is a poor forum for that anyways, which is why it's designed out of the rules, and that helps avoid some of what becomes side chatter becoming part of the main piece. So at this point, it's in the hands of council to deal with the feedback that we had, and it's council engaging with staff and making a determination. So that this isn't an opportunity for side interventions. So I let that one, as I wanted to make sure that I hadn't clarified that up front. So I apologize for that.
Maybe one thing I will add to, in terms of creating that defined space for each, with AODA guidelines, there's not just the people in wheelchairs, it's also people who have visual disabilities, and you need to give them clear visual separation, and then that's why we're putting in the rumble plates you see at the intersections. But with regards to the one-roof design, where there's no curb, there's no defined, the most efficient way to do that visual separation is with the curb, boulevard, and sidewalk. That's very clear for anyone who's visually impaired. But if you don't have that, a simple line on the road is impacted during the leaves, during the snow. And to add to that part, the boulevard allows for snow storage in the winter, and as well as leaves. The sidewalk stays clear during those times, and often this street isn't going to be plowed as a priority street. So if a snowpack comes down on it in the winter and it stays bad, it can be very hard to get rid of that snowpack. So that creates a real problem for people with visual impairment, which is why that sidewalk boulevard feature is effective for that, really. And if you don't have that, and this is where it becomes a very high design requirement to have a tactile design element built into these features that don't have curb, and be it interlock brick or tactile plates the whole way, which also gets very costly, lots of maintenance. So it's a big challenge for that aspect of the design, which, again, people that don't have it might not realize that that's an issue. And the project process, I don't know if anyone has any other questions about the design, you can ask it. We're at the 90% phase. We're hoping to tender in January.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff on these pieces? Caroline, I was hoping you could speak a little bit to the apartment building at the northwest corner. I do know it was touched on briefly in Howard's presentation, but I think we need some additional clarity on what's happening there, because I know that's detail that we weren't at yet at the PIC.
Through you, Councillor Henry. As I was saying before, the sidewalk will be on the west side, which is the apartment building side, and it's sort of allowing us to define our right-of-way space back and take back that space. Right now, the way it's designed, it's their parking driveway area merges into the road, and it's a very unsafe condition. We've reviewed with planning as well as legal to see if there was anything in place, site plan that permitted this, and we can't find anything. And the reality is that apartment building is encroaching on our right of way. So this is an excellent opportunity for the city to take back that space and define it the way it should have always been defined. And by giving them that defined entrance, it will be safer as well for people coming in and out. Sorry, I forgot what I was. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull that out and highlight it, because I know that's a concern highlighted and very, very legitimate and challenging, and one I've certainly experienced too in walking through that section of the street. It's very ill-defined, and people can move, in any direction at any time. So I appreciate the clarity. There were no other questions I saw from council to staff, and just in terms of procedure on this, to clarify where we're at. Staff is implementing existing city policy on a particular project. There's no decision point for council other than including it in the budget and tendering the works. There's not a design choice that council is making. The choice that we're being asked to consider by residents is to direct staff to exempt Roosevelt from the approved council policies and provide some other detail. That's effectively what's being asked of council tonight, just so everyone is clear. So I'll ask, as the facilitator of this meeting, whether there's any direction any member of council wishes to provide. Seeing none, I'll make a couple of comments here, and I'll say I appreciate that. I appreciate the large attendance of folks and the work that's being done on this, and the fine attention that people pay to their neighborhoods, the aesthetic, and how it feels and how it looks. I think there is a shared desire from residents and those at the city and those entrusted with governing the city for now and into the future, that safety is a concern. It's something that is our desire to implement. We've come to a different position on what that should look like in these cases. We have limited opportunities to affect the kinds of change in terms of accessibility, traffic calming, and other methods of providing safe alternatives to the automobile through neighborhoods. The biggest one we have is through road reconstruction, and it is such a rare opportunity that we get. There are many parts of the city crying out for that kind of attention, but they haven't bubbled up to that portion of the list where it's their road. And so that's why we're here tonight, but it gives us an opportunity to provide for those safe spaces and safe separation that can improve and increase safety in these kinds of areas and help provide people safe means for doing other things. I think folks on Warrington, folks in many other parts of the city, don't have less of a neighborhood experience because it's being built with sidewalks, and I hope that that's going to be the case in this instance, as the road gets redone, as staff implement past and future council policies. The direction around this table through our transportation master planning process has been very clear. That in fact we're not just maintaining the policy framework that we have. Council has a strong interest in effect doubling down on where this is going, because it takes seriously the challenge of safety and navigation for all road users through the community. And so we know we're going to butt into more of these from time to time, but that tonight we're staying the course, and I think it's necessary that we do so. But I do appreciate folks coming in and making their voices heard, and that we do need to keep apprised. There will be a construction meeting after the project is tendered, so that folks can see exactly what impacts may be through construction, and ask questions of how that process is going to work, and learn if there's anything new in terms of impacts. Because I think what I've heard so far, and I think what council and community's expectations should be, is that the impacts to existing vegetation should be limited to none, and that folks have been well handled through this process. And that's, I think, what we should reasonably expect to come out of the construction of all of this, given all the work up front. So with that brings us to item 10, formal and informal public meetings. And I'll give it a minute.
Excellent job. Thank you so much. I think that's as well as the argument.
Is this your water, Howard? Is this your water? Yes. Okay, I'm going to start a presentation in a second. So we're all moving out.
We're back. So we're now on item 10A, which is, I guess, a form of a formal public meeting, but not a Planning Act form of formal public meeting. That means stuff to people up here, but not so much to the public. It's a public meeting. People come, we hear things. This is good. Beechwood West 1 Homes Association Incorporated Special Services Area Levy Vote Update. I have a presentation from our Deputy Clerk, Julie Scott, and then a number of delegations.
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat what is in the report. You have that in front of you. In the essence of time this evening, I think I'm just going to highlight a few things from questions that I've received over the last few weeks that might be helpful. As you mentioned, this is a public meeting. It's one of 2 public meetings that we always host when we're carrying out a vote process for a special service area levy. Just a little bit of history. Approximately 35 to 45 years ago, 12 homes associations on the west side of Waterloo were incorporated. They're not run by the city. They were created by the developers to offer recreation facilities to the homes in those neighborhoods. They're run by elected boards of directors, and the homeowners have been required to pay a membership fee through covenants. It helps sometimes to think of this sort of like a condominium corporation, although it's not, or even certain rental facilities that offer services. So it's a slightly different model on that, but it's essentially the same thing at the end of the day. For Beechwood West, this is a picture of the neighborhood, so you can see the size of it. It is actually quite large, but it is something that is still marketed, even though the developers, that has long passed. It is something that's still marketed in real estate listings as a benefit for those moving into this neighborhood. In the early 2000s, some of the covenants in the older homes associations started to expire, and the associations approached the city with a concept to help keep them financially sustainable as the covenants began to expire. In 2005, working with Recreation and Leisure Services at the time, the city launched a pilot program that would provide the sustainable funding using a section of the Municipal Act that permits municipalities to raise funds for services that are being offered in one area of the municipality that are not being offered in others. In 2017, to provide clarity around the process, a policy was brought forward to Council that Council supported that really outlines the application process for starting a special service area levy approach. So homes associations are required to submit to us various legislation, including their incorporation papers, including information about when the covenants are expiring. They typically submit as well minutes from their AGMs where they, as a membership, decided to pursue this option. And the other thing that we require is a petition with the addresses that show that 66% of the members of the association have agreed to initiate the Special Service Area Levy, or SAL, process. While we will start the application process 2 years before they expire, that's partially because we don't run this type of process in a year when we're running a municipal election, because they're both very time-consuming. They would not actually take effect until the covenants expire. Once we initiate the vote process, it's 66% of those that voted that required to vote in favor of the SAL for us to bring it to Council. So it's not the same 66% that might have signed the petition, but it's 66% of those that voted in the mail-in ballot election. And we do have at least one public meeting while the ballots are being distributed, which is now, and then we will have another meeting if we receive the 66%. We do currently have 3 homes associations in the city that have the Special Service Area Levy. The first was in 2007, and the most recent 10 years later at Glasgow 2 Homes Association. You can see from this chart that they're varying sizes, 179 properties, 209, 60. We do see a lot of variance with our homes associations in the city. In all 3 of those cases, they did support the implementation of a SAL, and there was one other vote that we held in 2015, I believe, that was unsuccessful. There's 6 steps to the process. We're really in that vote process stage right now. The mail-in ballots have gone out to the homes that were part of the covenant members, and they have until December 2nd to mail in those ballots. I do want to reinforce for anyone in the audience today, when you received your mail-in ballot package, there was a declaration form. It's a pink form. It must accompany your ballot or we cannot use your ballot. And we've received one of those back already, an unsealed ballot envelope with no declaration inside. So please make sure that you're including the declaration and you're sealing all envelopes. For the Beechwood West one in particular, they do have 40 to 50 pass holder memberships that they've been selling each year. Not all homes associations do this, but some have over time as a way to increase revenue. They don't have all of the same membership rights as the covenanted properties, and different homes associations have sold them under different terms. But it's an annual application basis and it's not guaranteed. For Beechwood West 1 in particular, over the last 4 years, 88 different properties have purchased this pass holder, 26 for at least 3 of the last 4 years. And of these 26, we consider about 14 of them to be in close proximity. I'll just show you what that looks like on a map. So the outlined area here, these are the boundaries of Beechwood West 1. This dot here is where the recreation facilities are, abutting McRae Park. And these are the properties that we consider to be in close proximity, walking distance, that have been purchasing the annual pass on a fairly frequent basis. You will see that, I mentioned on the previous slide, there's one street that has had the greatest concentration of property owners purchasing the annual pass holder. And over the last 4 years, 5 of the properties purchased, and last year 6 properties of 16 on that street purchased an annual pass. The larger picture of this map shows where the annual pass holders are residing in the city. So you can see while there is certainly a grouping around the facility, there's properties all over the city of Waterloo that have been purchasing this pass holder. Unfortunately, with the SAL process, however, the annual associate pass holders would not be permitted going forward. I believe that's something that the association was aware of when they initiated the application, and it was a part of their decision-making process, but I'm going to let them speak to that more. That's it.
Thank you very much, Julie. Any questions from council for Julie about the process we're in at this standpoint? Councillor Hanmer, then Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. Julie, thank you for your presentation and update on where we're at with the SAL process. Just a question, and maybe just to remind us, when the associations are considering applying for the SAL, what kind of support or guidance or suggestions do we give to the organization? As I read through the policy, it really is to be something of last resort. So how do we work with the associations?
Through the chair to Councillor Hanmer. Typically, we see the homes associations approach us 2 to 5 years from when their covenants are going to start to expire. They generally come in and meet with myself, legal counsel, and Paul Hatinga in finance to learn more about the process. We also work with the neighborhood team. I know that they do a fair amount of outreach, and they're certainly looking to expand that to work with the associations and look for potential other opportunities. So while it's not really our role to give advice on other options that the associations can consider, because there are many, so they could pursue, continuing on with the associate pass holders, they could go the full condo corporation route. There's other options that we typically talk to them about, but we're really there to support them through the SAL process if that's something that they would like to do, and the neighborhood team and recreation staff or community services staff now, I know, work with them through some of those other options.
Through the chair, of the homes that are part of that association, how many are there and how many have expired so far, if any?
Through the chair to Mayor. So all of the covenants for this particular homes association, I believe, will be expiring at the same time. And I don't want to get the number wrong, but I believe for this particular association, it's 245. 244 properties are part of the covenant for this particular. Yeah. So this is one of the larger associations that we've dealt with. There's a fair number in the 150 to 200 range. This is, it's not, I believe it's not uncommon in this particular ward where the homes associations are for some of them to be larger than some of the older Beechwood homes associations.
I think one thing that surprised me when we've been through this once before is that once you're, and I have a home in a homes association, UB2, but your address is on that quote ownership list forevermore, regardless of whether or not you're as part of the covenant. You're on that list forever. And I'm wondering, like, do we ever coach people on what what might happen in the future? As you mentioned earlier, three homes associations switched. One didn't get the votes, hasn't switched. But at the end of the day, their property address is on that as a, I guess, owner. And maybe look to Mr. Ross of what they're considered of that piece of property, that pool and tennis court.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. It's a less than ideal situation. Both with respect to the covenants themselves, because they are not restrictive covenants, they're positive covenants. So even that was probably on tenuous ground. But going forward, you're right. We've investigated a few things. It's not my place to give legal advice, obviously, to the associations, but we've always encouraged them to look into other options. The condominium option, unfortunately, is a very expensive option. I think you're asking me is what happens if you just let it all go and no one does anything. And that's a very interesting point of law. I'm not sure. I mean, we would ultimately, we could take it back, but it'd be politically difficult for us to take lands if...
It's never happened before.
Fair enough.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, including what ifs, what ands? Okay. Seeing at this point, we have a number of delegations, which is the primary purpose of this public meeting today, while votes are being considered and marked and sent into the city. First up, we have Heidi Johnson, Secretary of the Beechwood West 1 Homes Association.
Hi. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Beechwood West 1 Homeowners Association regarding our special activity and service levy application. First, just to tell you a little bit about myself. Like the chair said, I am the secretary. I've been the secretary of the Beechwood West 1 Homeowners Association since 2015. I've been the chairperson of this Covenant Expiry Committee since 2017. I moved to Waterloo in 2010, and I first got involved with Beechwood West 1 Home Association as an annual pass holder. We purchased a pass and we came to the facilities and really loved the pool and the community spirit. And so when we looked to purchase a home, we actually sought after a home in that coveted home owners association so that we could enjoy the benefits for a long time. I just pushed the button. So there we go. So, hello. How do you make it go? Okay, down, super. So, yes, Beechwood West 1, it's 243 home association. Homes are in that association, and they're all, the covenant is expiring for all of them at the end of this year, so December 31st, 2019. We started this work way back in 2014. We spent 2014 and 2015 analyzing, investigating, planning, researching, looking at everything, a 360 where we looked completely at understanding business models, looking at our finances, looking at what the customer base wanted, looking at the legal aspects, looking at what this would mean to the property values. We interviewed all the homeowners associations around us, the ones whose covenants had expired, the ones that were expiring, the ones that were like us. So we looked at Beechwood South, Beechwood North, Beechwood Park, Upper Beechwood 2, Beechwood 2, Craiglee, Bridlegate, Glasgow Heights 2. We're all interviewed and all explored. And we also brainstormed other options, ones that people hadn't done. So we really were looking and seeing how can we make this Beechwood West 1 Home Association still be stable and viable once the covenant expired. The committee then came up with this 35-page report, which we which we presented to the board of directors. So the board of directors then looked at this, and it was first discussed at our annual general meeting in 2016. Beechwood West 1 Home Association has our annual general meeting every March. So what we presented in 2016 was that the Covenant Committee had done a great deal of exploration and then and had come across these 3 viable options. A pay-as-you-go, which is sort of a default. When the covenant expires, people who want to continue on paying pay, and if they don't, well, they don't. It's a very hard way to continue to run an organization when you don't know how many people are going to be paying dues every year, and it does really degrade the facilities and the safety involved. A bylaw amendment, so that was another option that one of the other pools had done. That was a little bit more difficult that we thought because in our community with 243 expiring covenants all at one time, it was too difficult of an option. So partnering up with the city for the special service area levy seemed to be the most feasible option. And again, in the investigations of the Covenant Committee, it was the one that all the other expired boards really said that had they done it, they were very happy with it, and if they hadn't done it, they wished they had done it. So between 2016 and 17, these were presented at the annual general meetings, and again, the board then really kind of dug down and looked at more deeply at these 3 options, looked at how we would have to change our operating budgets, how we would restructure things, what capital improvements needed to be done to the facilities, how can we promote the services to again get more community engagement. So we really were very active in looking at it, and then in 2018 at the annual general meeting, we proposed to the membership that we really think the best option moving forward was the special activity levy format. And at that time, we then created this lovely brochure and started handing this out, and also at the annual general meeting having talks about what is this process. As Julie Scott already outlined, it is quite an extensive process of applying for a special activity levy, including an internal ballot or petition, and then an application process, and then the external ballots as well. So on top of this communication, we also had 3 open forum kind of town halls within the community. First one was in June, Sunday, June the 24th. We had another one in August, on Thursday, August the 9th, and a final one in October, Monday, October the 22nd. We did that throughout different months, different days of the week, so that hopefully we could reach the broadest amount of the membership with holidays and sports activities and all that sort of thing, so that many people could come. From that feeling, it really seemed that the majority of the membership was very much in favor of how moving forward with the special activity levy. So on 2019, because we had to take a little break in 2018 because of that election, in 2019 we did send out in our February newsletter, which goes door to door to all our Covenant households, the internal vote that we were doing, and again another newsletter explaining the process that the board of directors had gone through, and an explanation of the options and how the special activity service levy goes through. And really, as a committee chair, I wanted more than a super majority. I wanted a super duper major majority, because this is a lot of work, and I wanted to really make sure that people were on board with this before we went ahead with it. And from our internal vote, this is all the communications that we had for people. So our annual general meetings, if you don't attend our annual general meetings, the annual general meeting minutes are available on our website under the member tab. This brochure as well is on the website. The newsletter, again, is sent out door to door to every single one of the 243 households. The information sheet and the internal ballot is, again, on the website as well. And so once the internal ballot was sent out, the deadline for that was June 1st. And like I said, I really wanted a super majority before we completed the application. And we got 86% of our membership voting in favor of us having a special service area levy. That's 211 of the votes came back as a yes vote. We had 16 people vote against, and we had 16 people that did not respond to the vote, despite going door to door to their house again, sending them an email, and in some cases even sending a letter with a self-addressed stamped envelope to return back the ballot. We did get one other vote after we had closed the ballot. So this 86 is counting in that those 16 non-respondents were against the special activity levy. If you look at the actual number of total voters, we actually have 92% of the return votes in favor of the special activity levy. So based on that, definitely seemed very much that this was something that the community wants, the community is in favor for. So on June the 12th, the Board of Directors signed the resolution, and we completed the application, which we submitted on June the 20th of this year to the City Clerk, Julie Scott. So that's my presentation. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. That's a lot of detail. That's impressive. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Henry, through you. Heidi, thank you for all your leadership over the last, not just year, but really the last 4 years. It seems like since you became secretary, you were leading this little process. So
oh no, there's been lots of
there's lots of people that have been in it,
yes.
for sure. No, that's great. It is a lot of work to do it, so your efforts are appreciated. As we saw from Ms. Scott's presentation, you're one of the associations that has a number of annual season pass holders. So I'm just curious, what kind of communication or what kind of involvement or opportunity did the annual season pass holders have in the process?
Well, the annual season pass holders really didn't have much input because they're just annually, right? We never know who's going to re-register. We don't know how many we're going to sell in the following year. So really it is a seasonal pass that's good for the season of basically when the pool opens, which is the May long weekend, until the tennis courts close, which is usually, after Thanksgiving. So they don't have the same invested interest as the Covenant households, which have been paying in since it started. So 40 years, those are the ones that the property value is tied in to these community resources. So this is what, where people have been paying it forward or therefore paying it back for however many years, whether they're using the facilities or not. So those are the ones that are our main stakeholders when we're moving forward.
Okay. So I think I'm understanding from how you've described that within the association you have members that are part of the covenant, and then annual season holders who really it's just for the duration of the season, and there's no other rights or accountabilities that go along with that.
Correct. And because they are not obligated to re-sign up the following year, right. And the number of passes that we've sell has been like something that we've fluctuated.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Heidi? I have one, and don't read anything into this other than my abiding curiosity as a councillor that has 8 homes associations in it, some of which have more difficult challenges than others. You talked about a bylaw amendment as an option. Can you tell me more about what that is? Because that's the first I've heard of that as an option. So I'm just curious as to what that is.
So my understanding of what the bylaw is that the covenant properties, so your covenant is, again, this positive enforcing rule. You're kind of reinstating that for an infinite amount of time, but you need to have 100% buy-in by the houses that are doing this bylaw amendment. So the home association that does this in our community, they had differing expiry levels. So they were able to sort of tackle one street at a time and get 100% vote in. And what they've done for those is that if the household becomes in arrears, so is not paying their annual dues, when that house goes up for sale, for that new owner to then become a member in good standing at that pool, all the back dues now have to be paid for. And I just actually got an email today from a real estate agent in our area who wanted to know about a house in our covenant areas, if there was back dues and would that have to be repaid back in, because that was definitely something that they wanted to be put into the offer for that. So again, that wasn't a real option that we found feasible.
It sounds challenging. I was curious since that's the first I'd heard of it. So. Councillor Hanmer?
Sorry, just probably for a clarification, you're referring to a bylaw, the association's bylaw, because the home associations are independent not-for-profit corporations. Is that correct? It's not a city bylaw.
No, yes.
Thank you.
That I'm
so it's
absolutely
restating,
aware
it's
of.
remaking
It's
a
a
new
corporate
covenant.
bylaw, yeah.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be something we're doing. That I'm aware of that. Okay. that was just out of my abiding curiosity. Next up, we have, I see no further questions. Thank you very much, very detailed information. Next up, we have Grant and Jennifer Gingrich.
Actually, just Grant, I think. But, and a big thank you to Heidi and our board. Our being here tonight is the culmination of many years of hard work by a tireless group of volunteers, many of whom are here tonight. So, good evening. My name is Grant Gingrich, and I'm a resident and member of Beechwood West 1. I've been voicing my support for this levy proposal for 2 years now. Thank you for permitting me to speak. I hope it's not too late, as voting has already begun. My target audience for tonight was originally going to be twofold. I was going to speak somehow directly to my neighbors who are in opposition to the levy, but hearing some of the results of some of the polling kind of sounds like that's not so necessary. And what I'm taking from that is encouragement, because what it tells me is that even folks in the neighborhood who may not use the facilities anymore, or whose kids have long since left home, or aren't getting use out of the facilities, realize that if for no other reason than out of pure self-interest on their property value, it is to the benefit of everyone in the neighborhood to be a part of the homes association and to maintain these facilities. And so that's encouraging. Some more thoughts, just by way of background. My family and I moved to BW1 almost 8 years ago. And by the end of our first summer, we moved in January. By the end of our first summer, we knew everybody on our street, and we knew at least a dozen families in a several block radius of where we lived. And it was wonderful then, and it continues to be wonderful today. And talk with anyone who's moved in recently, they all seek out our neighborhood because of the pool, because they want that same sense of community. And it really delivers on that. So glad to hear things are as uniformly or as positive as they are. The other point I wanted to get across was I wanted to speak directly to the city, actually, and assuming hopefully a vote in the affirmative, I wanted to say that it's my hope that the city will embrace its new role in running the BW1 facility, or partnering to run the BW facility. It's the tempting thing might be to do so quietly, or to try and fly under the radar, out of some anxiety or perception that support is being given to one area of the city or to one socio-economic demographic, out of concern that one area is getting something that another area of the city is not. And the way I look at it anyway is that we're not. We're not asking for tax money from other parts of the city to fund leisure activities in Beechwood. This has never been the case. In fact, we're looking at, what we're asking is to keep our facilities open, and for those who benefit from those facilities to continue to pay for them themselves. I say that the city should embrace its new role because this facility and the volunteers who work so hard on it promote exactly the same kinds of outcomes that are championed by the city's own neighborhood strategy. There's definitely an alignment here. For close to 40 years, the residents of BW1 have run programming and events for children, teens, and adults, resulting in a community spirit that's unlike anywhere else that I've lived. And so in support of its own strategy, and more than just, sort of cleaning the pool and cutting the grass and things like that, there's an opportunity really for the city to partner and collaborate with the BW1 residents, and to foster continued programming and outcomes, and to share successes, and to share those successes with other areas of the city, with other neighborhoods. I'll close by saying that there is literally a book of knowledge here, and that it would be a shame both for BW1 and for the broader city if this were to be lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Any questions for Grant? Okay, Councillor Hanmer has a question for Grant.
Grant, through you, Chair Henry. Grant, thank you very much for sharing with us the the pros and cons and all the benefits you believe you've realized from the association itself. My question is really more to you being a member of the association, and this process is a long process to go through, and there's lots of information to go. So my question just is, as a member of the association and the work that the association board has done, do you feel that you were given enough information, given the opportunities, that this is really being a free vote for the members within the association?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, not everybody does, but I've attended a couple of annual general meetings, so it certainly comes out there. It's been coming out for a number of years, actually. And by way of that and word of mouth, I mean, everybody on the street talks about this stuff, right? We all have a shared stake in this. But also the communications that have been mailed, that have been sent directly to every household. It's a well-organized group. It's been going for close to 40 years. We have newsletters, we have websites, we have Facebook pages. That communication reaches out to the broad membership. And as I can't remember the exact number, but Heidi, I think it's been 2 formal communications at least that have come out to residents. And as well, the mailing we got with our ballot as well was very clear in how this worked and what our obligations are.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Sharif Mohammed.
Chair and member of council, I'd like to start by thanking you for allowing me to speak in front of you today. I've lived in Waterloo my entire life and grew up in Upper Beechwood as a member family of the Upper Beechwood 1 pool. I have fond memories of this as a child, which I've carried with me until now. A community recreation center provided me with a strong sense of community where friends and family gathered to enjoy each other's company. Most recently, my family and I have moved to Hemingway Place, and we've been there for about 5 years now. During that entire time, we've been associate members of Beechwood West 1 Community Center. My kids have had the same joy and community from the community pool as I once did when I was a child. I'm here today to oppose the SAL that is being initiated to be put in place for Beechwood 1 West Home Association. The implementation of the SAL would exclude over 50 families that are currently associates unnecessarily from the pool, as use of the pool by associate members is precluded by the SAL. Rather than continue to bring a community together, the initiation of a SAL will just do the opposite. The SAL is intended to be a last resort, as mentioned previously, for home associations when all models of self-sustainability have been exhausted and viability of the community pool without the SAL is in question. The Beechwood 1 West pool is fully viable and a self-sustainable model, which should be the first option as per the city's preference for self-sustaining pools. I understand other home associations have seeked out the SAL, as shown on the presentations, but the circumstances around those pools were very different than Beechwood West 1. There is hundreds of households off of Beechwood Drive and the streets that feed off of Beechwood Drive that that are not part of a home association and do not belong to another pool. All the previous pools have been locked in by surrounding home associations where people had community pools. This created a difficulty in attracting associate memberships, which is not an issue for Beechwood West 1. If at this time I could direct you, there was a handout that was provided for each of you. This handout shows the viability, the self-sustaining viability of Beechwood West 1. I'll start off with a little bit of background. The SAL requires 67% supermajority for it to be passed. This in essence means that 67% at a minimum are willing to pay for the use of the pool in the Covenant area. As well, it was noted that the internal vote showed 86%. That would infer that 86% are willing to pay for the pool voluntarily without a SAL. In the AGM of Beechwood West 1, they indicated that the pool is operated on just Covenant member fees without the use of associate member fees. 237 paid members equated to about $95,000 of membership fees from members. Beechwood West 1 has 50 associate members and has had about this level of associates for many years leading up to now. As an important point as well, the neighboring pools in Upper Beechwood 1 and 2 both as well have waiting lists. So it shows the demand for these recreation centers in the neighborhood. Currently, associate membership fees for Beechwood 1 West are $500, excluding HST. Both beaches in Upper Beechwood, 1 and 2, pools charge $575 per associate membership. This next section compares the financial models under the SAL and the self-sustaining models. The SAL model, as you can see, obviously 100% of the covenant membership would pay their dues at $400 per member, would generate just over $97,000 in membership revenue. That would be reduced by the 1% administration fee of the SAL, which is an incremental cost of moving forward with a SAL. That brings the total revenues from membership to just over $96,000. The self-sustaining voluntary pay model with the current fee structure, assuming the most conservative estimate of 67 current covenant members voluntarily paying, would generate about $65,000 of revenue. 50 home associates that currently exist today would generate another $25,000. Therefore, only 12 more associate members would be required to achieve the same revenue level in a self-sustaining model. In the third model, self-sustaining voluntary pay model with an increase in the fees. I previously mentioned neighboring pools charge $575 per membership versus Beechwood West 1. If the fees were increased to $575 for associate members, they would only require 5 associate members in addition to what's there today to make this pool, the revenues exactly the same as they would be under the SAL. So overall, the conclusion is the pool is fully viable in the current economic circumstances today, and the SAL is not necessary at this time. It is meant not to be a precaution for what may be in the future in terms of uncertainty. It's meant to be for a last resort for pools who are struggling financially today. It's clearly not the case for Beechwood West 1. And there's other ways to mitigate the risk of year-over-year revenue, and those have not been explored yet. Things like looking at long-term agreements for membership have not been explored and are potential options to mitigate the risk of that fluctuation in year-over-year membership. So the pool has been a focal point of the community, not as a result of lines drawn by developers decades ago, but on how the community interacts and unites today around it. Many of us outside the covenant boundary are willing and ready to participate in helping the Home Association in any way we can to make Beechwood West 1 pool vibrant and successful for both members and associates by working together. I ask that Council consider this moving forward, as I hope we can keep the community together, and most of all for all the kids who will be hurt most by this.
Thank you very much, Sharif. Are there any questions for the delegation? There are 2, 3. I'll start with Councillor Hanmer, and then I'll go to others.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. Sharif, thank you very much for putting the information together in the analysis. My question is, have you had the opportunity to share the work that you've done and the suggestions with the Home Association Board?
We have not shared this with the board. My expectation is that this type of analysis would have been done in kind of coming up with the SAL application on the onset. But as previously mentioned, as associates, we were not kind of privy to that information or included in any of those decisions.
Right, and it did look from information that we received tonight that may have been part of the process. I think that's okay. That's it for my questions. Thank you.
Next, I have Councillor Bonagor, Councillor Veith, and Councillor Bassett.
Actually, Councillor Hanman just asked the question I was going to ask, so thank you, and thank you for coming tonight. I was curious as to how the residents that live right nearby were being impacted, so I appreciate you coming forward to talk to us.
Thanks.
Councillor Veith.
Through you, Chair Henry. Thank you for coming. So I live in a ward where we don't have these, so it's a little bit hard for me to understand. But so if what happened was we didn't do this, there was no SAL, things carried on the way they were, how do you administer, how do you collect, how do you pay for the pool and all the money that goes around to keep it going?
So today the fees for the pool are collected by the board. That would continue going forward, so same model as today. And I previously mentioned there's many associate members that are happy to assist in that administration and help collect the payments and take on some of that burden, as we do understand it is a lot of work, and we're fully prepared to step up and take that responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at, was who, that's a big job to go around and collect all that money from everybody. So thank you for the answer.
And Councillor Vassy.
Through you, Chair. Not easy to speak up in this context, so I appreciate you coming tonight. And also quite a testament to how much this place meant to you growing up if you're willing to pay $75 more a year. So it obviously means a lot to you. I just want to kind of, in the context of trying to reduce car trips in the city and promote the neighborhood strategy and thinking about equity for people who don't geographically live in particular areas, I'd like to get a sense of, say the SAL were approved and you needed to get your kids to swimming, and what would community look like to you? Where would you go swimming? How would your kids connect with nearby residents otherwise?
Yeah, I guess a couple comments there. The first one is, in all likelihood, we would have to drive to another pool. There is a few within walking distance, but like I said, the neighboring pools also have wait lists for associates, kind of demonstrating the strong demand in the neighborhood for these community centers. The other thing is our kids walk pretty much right by it on the way to school. So it really does divide kind of a neighborhood, and it divides kids in terms of some kids can go and some can't, which is not the case today. If it was like that the entire time, it would be a different story. But we've been using this pool for 5 years, as many family and many associates have, and then it's kind of being pulled away.
And any further questions for the delegate? Thank you very much for coming and responding to further questions as well. Next up, we have John Bushy, also a resident of Waterloo.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Bushy. Along with my family, I'm a resident of Hemingway Crescent and have been for the last year and a half. And I believe Hemingway was the one on the map with the high concentration of associate members. So we've been residents in Waterloo for the last year and a half, and we've been associate members of the pool for the last 2 years. I spent a lot of time thinking about this issue, and I think at the end of the day, everybody here wants the same thing on both sides. We want to see a vibrant, sustainable community hub in the pool and tennis courts, and we clearly have two different visions of getting there. And I also understand why the board did what they did, and I don't hold any ill will towards the board. I think we need to thank them for being great volunteers and for all the work they put in, and I think that's fantastic. I know they've put countless hours into this, and this is something very close to their heart, and I just wanted to recognize that even though I have a different version of how this should look, we do appreciate the work they've put in. And as was mentioned, this process started in 2014 and 2015, and since then, and I do believe that they acted in the best interest of the information that they may have had at that time, but since then, our neighborhood's changed a lot. As I mentioned, we're new to the neighborhood, and in the year and a half since we've been there, within about a block radius, we've seen 6 homes turn over. And by and large, it's empty nesters that are leaving the neighborhood, young families moving in, and when I look at that trend, I only see the interest in the pool increasing from that surrounding area. I think in a time of disagreement, we have to go to a common document and look at the values that are stated for us to abide by. And I think in this case, that document is the Waterloo's neighborhood strategy document. And if we look at that document, right at the beginning, it says the vision for Waterloo neighborhoods over the next 10 years is Waterloo is a city of caring, vibrant, engaged neighborhoods where everyone belongs. And a little further in the document, it outlines 6 guiding principles. Number 4 of which is neighborhood community building should aim to be inclusive. I'm not going to read the document's long, and it's a really beautiful and good document, I think, and it's a really inspiring vision for what the neighborhoods in the city could look like. But values only work if they're upheld. Without being upheld, they don't mean anything. And the reason I'm here tonight is to ask of council to allocate your resources and influence not to support the SAL, but to push the board to work with the associate members to find a viable option for all of us. An inclusive situation that's aligned with the neighborhood strategy values and makes us all feel like a neighborhood again. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Are there questions for the delegate? Councillor Henry?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry, probably more a comment. John, thank you very much. You and I did have the opportunity to talk about the values and virtues with the neighborhood strategy. So I appreciate you bringing that forward again. And I think you realize this is the public meeting, and there is no vote tonight, and we're in the middle of a process. However, I do appreciate your comments, and there are members of the board here tonight. So hopefully, between both your presentation and Sharif's, there will be some opportunities for you to have that conversation with the board. So again, thank you for taking time to pull things together.
And Councillor Bonigar.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you as well for coming. I'm just curious. I don't know this neck of Waterloo intimately, so can you explain to me, I understand that the Homes Association has a set geography, and you are right near that. Is there like a natural edge, or how are we looking at like this amorphous area where there may not end up being an edge? I'm just trying to work out the practicalities of this.
Good question. I don't know the history of the neighborhood very well, but I think when the Homes Association was formed, our court was a farmer's field. So the homes went up in the 80s for the most part. Now, and Sharif alluded to this, if you look at the Homes Association, there's about 100 homes that run right along the edge that aren't a part of any association. And so myself and my neighbors would be a part of that greater area, and naturally we're attracted to the closest Homes Association.
Other questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming. And our last registered delegation this evening is Chris Reed. Chris?
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time in the evening and hearing us. Thanks, John. I will not be as eloquent or as poetic as John, but I will do my best. So I have a few things I wanted to share. One was just sort of, what does a pool mean to us? What does a community pool mean? And for us, it's a shared resource that a lot of families are using. But really, if you come to the pool on any day, you'll see who the pool is really for, and it's for the children. The children are there for hours on end. They walk to the pool, they bike to the pool, they meet their friends, they give a call, and it's really a place for them all to join. It's a lot of kids from Mary Johnston School. That's probably the factor that ties a lot of these families together. Is a lot of them go to Mary Johnston, but the families that whose kids go to Mary Johnston do not necessarily have access to the pool. So, and to John's point, there's a lot of areas that were not built in time to have access, but they are very amorphous. You don't have to cross any major streets. You just literally walk down a path, a dirt path, and then you're in, within a minute, you're literally in the area that's allowed to, legally have access to the pool. So for us, the pool is part of the social fabric. The pool is summer, the summer is pool, right? When summer comes, the kids are saying, when's the pool open? When's the pool gonna open? When's the pool gonna open? Because it's literally part of their lives. And with 50 to 60 associate members, and most of the associates I know have 3 kids. So if we round down to 2, it's 110 to 160 children who are affected by this decision. And these children are kids who love their time at the pool. It is of absolute importance. And that's why we take this so seriously, is because, we cannot go to a pool. I don't need to go to a pool, but my kids need to go to the pool. So that's kind of framing like the importance of this for us. In the current state, the pool meets more needs of the community than in the proposed state, right? The proposed state excludes families. The current state is very healthy, financials are very healthy, there's lots of families, and associates contribute a lot financially. So if you're talking about like worst case scenario, financial viability, the 30,000+ that we contribute is material, right? If you think of 245 houses times $500, that's a budget of $122K. 30 grand on top of $122K it's material, right? Like you can do the math. It's a lot of money. So, and there's a wait list. And there's a lot of people who love the pool. So, emotionally and financially, I think there's strong drivers. Again, the associates would love to participate. We are, the question was asked, were the associates consulted? I mean, obviously financially, we are a major contributor. So not being consulted does seem odd as part of finding a solution, but we were not, and that's fine. But we are, within the rights we've been given, willing participants. And so within those rights, we are willing to participate. And if we had more rights, we would be willing to participate to a greater degree. So, we've even offered to say, hey, you know what, you want to create a new covenant? Like, sign us up. We'll sign up for 45 years. Like, we'll pay for 45 years. And when you talk about values, the realtors, regardless of whether you're in the zone or out of the zone, promote the pool. So all the property values are tied to the pool. So if you want to talk about property values, you need to include all the houses in the property value discussion, because as a marketing tool, the pool is used and it contributes to value not just of the members' homes, but of all the surrounding homes, whether or not they choose to get an associate membership. So that's an important factor too. So and I echo John's sentiment that the board is operating in the way they think makes sense. They're trying to protect values. This is obviously an easy thing, right? Let's get the city to make everyone to pay whether they want to or not, and poof, we don't have to collect checks, even though 96% of people paid and 50 or 60 associates paid. Even though payment was not an issue, it's still easier, right? No one's going to argue with like automatic deposit, right? You guys take 1%, seems pretty fair. So I'm not saying that doesn't make sense, but so I understand that, but that's not all that should be considered, right? We're not here to drive financial convenience. We're here to drive community outcomes. And so I think in a SAL world, we're talking about a world where families who want to go, who derive significant benefit, are excluded, and families who don't want to, which I guess was 14%, are forced to pay. That sounds worse, right? It sounds like there's less money, there's more unhappy people. Generally, like by my estimate, seems like a worse scenario. And again, we're talking about SALs for a worst case scenario. Not to drive a worst case scenario, to solve a worst case scenario. So in a city that hopes for a strong social fabric, for hopes to have accessibility, I mean, there's a lot of low-income housing in that area where you can walk to the pool. And when you talked about Roosevelt and you talked about future use, those families will never have access to this pool. You can't account for their future children and their future happiness in the SAL plan. But in the current plan, all those families have the ability to have access to a pool and to walk to a pool, not to drive, to ride their bikes and to be with their friends who also go to the same school they do. I think it's also important, and I'm going based on the communications the board had. And in the board's communications, they talked about uncertainty of the future, reduced property values, proof positive based on other pools that it just nothing else will work, and the only realistic option is the cell. You know, there was a claim that there would be reduced safety, but the pool's been operating, I assume, with good safety for a long time, and it's doing so with a better financial profile. So I can't see how a worse financial profile would drive better safety results. Again, I understand financial convenience of the sort of EFT style payment. So, you know, I think if council, and I know you're not voting, but if you choose to vote yes, maybe you can invite the 100 to 150 kids to here, and you could explain to them, because they're asking us, they're saying, why are we losing our pool? Maybe you can explain to them why they're losing their pool, because I don't understand it. Especially if the SAL and the community, the kind of community we want to build here, seem to oppose that kind of outcome. I can also say, just because we talked about property values, when I bought my house, before I went firm, I talked to the board and said, I'm only closing on my house if I can have access to this pool. They said, yeah, of course, you can be an associate member. And you know, if you talk to the associates, they've bought houses in this area within walking distance. Again, because these houses were built at different times. You couldn't, you know, you can't pre-plan for houses that don't exist. But, you know, 45 years later, things are a little different. And people make decisions with their most important asset, spend a lot of money on a house to have access to a pool, and gone. So it's all that would probably be the most distressing part as like an adult, aside from the stress my kids feel from not having access to a pool. So I hope that council considers these things in its decisions, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Looking to council if there are questions for the delegation. I see questions for staff, but not for the delegation. Thank you very much for coming, Chris. We do appreciate it. Questions for staff from Councillor Hanmer and Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair Henry, through you. I think this question is probably more for Mr. Ross, but it could be also for Ms. Scott. We are going through the process with the special service area levy based on the covenant. Do we have any tools or the ability to expand what that covenant area might be?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Of course, I'm trying not to get ideological about this, but there is an important reason why we narrow the SAL to the former covenant area. It's to give it a little bit more credibility vis-a-vis the section of the Municipal Act that authorizes special service levies. I know it was referred to as a special activity levy, but it's not. It's the A is for area, and that's a geographic boundary, and that's why it's based on the covenant. It's unfortunate though, because I think what we're hearing is a lot of people like the same pool, and it's creating, you know, neighborhood magic for not just the covenanted area, but the area outside of it. So certainly that is a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge for this council when the vote comes. However, we are looking. The neighborhood outreach has been a bit of a game changer, and so staff are trying to look at this, you know, from a different approach to perhaps eventually provide a toolkit, because each neighborhood association is in a different situation and might be able to benefit, and we don't necessarily want to punish those associations that are doing well financially, like this one. So there are potentially some other tools that could become available vis-a-vis the, you know, the future of the pools, and you know, perhaps there would be some resolution where if this is a cost avoidance, and I don't want to delve too much into other people's territory, but it is a cost avoidance measure for the city in that it's potentially preventing us from having to build larger facilities. So if that's the case, then is there a way that we could assist organizations that that rely upon their associate memberships to help keep things afloat? So we are looking at all those things. You're not going to solve it in time for the vote on the SAL, but it certainly is a consideration.
So thank you. Sorry, I may have further questions when we do get to this stage where we are voting after the voting period's finished. So thank you.
And Councillor Bonagor, then Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Chair Henry. Again, I just really appreciate the very deep discussion we've had tonight, and I hope that both parties both sides of it can kind of go away and have further discussions with each other to move this forward in some way. But I've got to say, your kids are so lucky because most other kids across the city are excluded from this. So, yes, you're in the position where you're about to lose access, but most people don't even have access. So I'm just curious, from the city's point of view, I mean, how much longer will things like this be viable, given that they are inherently divisive?
Through the chair to Councillor Broniger, I think that's a difficult question for us to answer. I think all we can do is really speak to the fact that these were purpose-built. Is it equitable? No, it never was. They were built, they were designed to offer an amenity service level, much like you see in other condo corporations and some rental apartment buildings. They have different levels of services that are offered. These subdivisions were designed that way by developers. The pools were built, they were paid for by the properties that were the covenanted members. They've continued to pay for those expenses over 30 to 45 years. They're private recreation facilities within the city of Waterloo. Is it a model that we would support today going forward? Potentially not. However, there is a subdivision that's built recently in Waterloo that does have a condo element to it to support trails and green spaces. So it's not an unheard of model within North America. Does it create equitable, does it create equal recreation facility and experiences across the city? No, it doesn't. It was never built that way. But it does ensure that those that are receiving that additional benefit are the ones that are paying for it and have paid for it from the beginning, and city funds are not being used to operate it, so that, as Mr. Ross mentioned, perhaps those funds can be set aside for other facilities in the city.
And just outside of the discussion of the SAL specifically, could the Homes Association vote to expand the covenant area? Like, does it have that power, or is that just not something that's even possible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest no, but I would say, everything's on the table with whatever people want to investigate. Certainly, internal legal counsel is all ears with respect to these matters. For the reasons outlined by everyone here with their concerns, as well as Ms. Scott. Now, another way to look at it would be, yes, it's inequitable, but as Ms. Scott pointed out, it has been paid for. So it's sort of like, it's opting to drive on the 407 instead of the 401 or something along those lines. But yes, it is inequitable, and it does benefit a certain area of the city.
Here I have Councillor Bodley, then Councillor Vasek.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair Henry, I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction related to this. And I'm going to speak maybe on behalf, based on that map, my ward would appear to be the ward outside of Councillor Henry's ward that has the most associate members in it, being just to the north and west of it. And I really appreciate what John said, and I probably also won't be as eloquent or poetic as him, but regarding the Beechwood West 1 volunteers that are really working to try and come to a solution here. I appreciate all the time and effort that has been put in here, and I recognize the difficulty and the challenges that are associated with this decision. But to go in the direction I want to go with this, I think in part, this speaks to the void of recreational facilities that we have on the west end of the city. And I know this has been a focus of community services, and I've seen lines in our 10-year budget for and dollar amounts set aside in the 10-year budget for increasing the amount of recreation facilities on the west end. I also know that the Y and the Harper Library has filled some of that void, to be certain. There's no doubt about that. And I also know that there's a ton of challenges associated with increasing the amount of recreation facilities in the west end, not just the budget, the availability of land, etc. But I'm going to use this as an opportunity to express that this must continue to be a focus for community services to find recreation facilities in the west end, because although I appreciate a lot of what Grant said as well too about like the pride in the neighborhood and the ability to meet your neighbors and how this must be a really great destination point for the neighborhood, a community center that is excluding members of the community is not in the best interest of the community as a whole, in my opinion. And so hopefully the city can fill that void, not necessarily in the short term, but in the long term, hopefully we can look at a truly inclusive community center on the west end that will have the same feel impact on the broader community as this Beechwood West 1 facilities have had for their members.
And Councillor Vasek.
Okay, through you, Chair Henry. Don't try and take any renovation money away from Moses Springer, first of all. Councillor Botley. That's first step. Definitely not. But my question is, so like my research and work is around the geographical distribution of poverty, and I realize we're not talking about poverty here, but no, we're not. But what we are talking about is the possibility for government policies that divide communities by various demographic characteristics. So I mean, for example, expressways are known as tools that divide affluence and poverty throughout North America and have been used as a tool for that. And so I guess what I'm asking, just like we asked during the climate emergency, like we need residents' help to make these things work is, and I think Councillor Hanmer referred to this, is what I'm asking you is to think about what kind of, to come together and what kind of policies do you want the city to be passing that bring communities together. And I think that's the theme that I'm hearing from council and from you to make this a stronger neighborhood. I don't want policies that are divisive and that separate, and this is a total guess, but my guess is that the homes within the association are worth more than the homes outside of the association. No, not at all. Okay. So that was a wrong guess. Good to know. I'm okay being wrong. I'm wrong a lot of the time, but also right a lot of the time. I digress for Chair Henry's benefit. So in any case, my call is to please come together and think about what kind of policies that you want council to be approving that are inclusive and that generate community cohesion and are not divisive.
That didn't sound like an answerable question to staff. It sounded rhetorical.
Staff, might you be able to support residents in bringing one another together to come to some potentially mutually beneficial solutions?
Is anyone looking for that? Okay, not seeing, have responded. Other comments, Councillor Freeman?
Through you, Chair Henry. So where I struggle with this is that we have, as a city, we have very limited tools to even participate in this conversation with the two neighborhoods. Like as a city, the use of this provision in the Municipal Act is a stretch, to say the least. Right? So we don't own the Municipal Act. It's a provincial piece of legislation. It's not a city piece of legislation. So I can't physically amend the Municipal Act to do something different. And I don't have a tool to direct the Homes Association to choose a different course of action. I can't do that. like even you made reference to the strategic plan, and that's a great reference, but it's for the stuff that I own, and it's the stuff that I have the ability to change. And I don't see any ability to change any of this because it's entirely privately held. It's privately insured. It's privately operated. It's not open to the whole community. And so I, like I look at the toolkit that we have and say we've stretched it thin to even be able to achieve this. And so I don't know what else to do. And I can tell you to go back and try to work it out with each other, but you don't have any different tools either. And neither does my staff team, right? They can't change the confines of the Municipal Act. We can't even create a different bylaw that could potentially resolve this issue because we don't have the power to actually tax, which is a tool that we're using to collect this resource. So these situations are impossible, and I could build a community center 10 ways to Sunday, but if people choose not to join that community center, and then it's an empty building too, right? Because we have lots of space within our swimming programs at the city. We know that. So we have capacity to embrace your families if you can't be a part of this pool, but it seems like that's not what you want. You want your children to continue to be together with the children that they've come to be together with all this time, and I get that. And no, sorry, but like that's but I'm just trying to tell you, like this is the box. This is the box that I'm in, right? So all I can do tonight is to ask, a stupid question that I'll let staff ruminate on, which is, can people who are within the SAL invite guests to be part of the pool?
Through the chair to Councillor Freeman, that would depend on the rules of the individual associations. I'm aware of some that do offer a limited number of guests, but I can't speak to the precise nature of this association, but we could certainly ask and follow up in our next report.
And I guess the other piece is can they run fundraising events for their pool?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think one of the keys to a don't ask, don't tell policy is that no one asks. But having said that, I think there is obviously there would be some challenges in enforcing, lessons or something, fee for service that occurs. I think we certainly don't have the resources to police every Beechwood pool out there as to, their arrangements. So you could leave it at that.
So where we're at the moment is receiving information and hearing information from members of the public. Per council approved policy, this is the step in the process where we hear while voting is taking place. The next opportunity for council and the community to engage on this question, for council to engage on this question and to hear from the community prior to doing so, is on, it appears, January 13th, when, provided that the votes that are returned, that there are at least 2/3 in favor, we will see a report on January 13th. I would suggest to staff that they allocate sufficient time for council to engage on that report and hear from the public based on the preliminary debate that we've effectively heard tonight through questions. No doubt there will be more of it on January 13th. So I will save my own views, comments, and how I've been viewing these issues until that time, because that's when I've been planning to do it. But I'll let Councillor Hammer perhaps move the motion to receive information and have a comment.
Yes,
before
I
that,
have a
yeah.
comment first, and then I will move the motion. I would like to request that regardless of what the outcome of the vote is, that we do have time on January 13th to discuss this particular issue. And then I would be happy to move that we receive the staff report, Corp 219083, and the other information presented by the delegations tonight.
I need a seconder for that, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Any debate on receiving this information? Seeing none, I'll take the vote. All those in favor? Those opposed? Councillor Beath? Nope. That's opposed. Per our procedure bylaw. Thank you very much for everyone coming in for that. I'm sure we'll see many people back in chambers on January 13th. We'll take 2 minutes, given it'll take that long for the chambers to empty and be quiet enough for us to continue.
No, I actually came in at 2015.
We are back in order. If there are conversations that aren't formally part of this, I would appreciate if folks took those outside. Thank you. Next up is our formal public meeting on the development charge bylaw update. And this one is a Planning Act. Because it's a formal public meeting under the Planning Act, I have a script. So I will read the script in semi-dramatic fashion. The chair says, this is a formal public meeting to consider the proposed updates to the development charges bylaw. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on October 17, 2019 and October 24, 2019. The development charges background study was available for review on the city's website as of October 17, 2019.
And what a substantial study it was. Good reading. Michael Pugliese will now introduce the representative from Hemson Consulting who prepared the development charges background study.
Good. Thank you, Chair Henry, members of council, staff, and anyone in the public that's watching on the YouTube version, perhaps.
There are many, I am sure.
Just wanted to introduce our consultants. We have Craig Binning from Hemson Consulting and Julia Siraki from Hemson Consulting as well. They're going to walk you through a bit about the Development Charge Act and some of the mechanics that went behind the background study creation and some of the more points of consideration for council that were put through the staff report that was in front of you tonight as well. I'll be at the staff table to address any questions afterwards, but without further ado, one more thing, just to make council aware, there was some correspondence sent from a couple stakeholders within the community, I believe on Friday to council, so just want to ensure that you had received it and able to review it in light of the public meeting tonight. So now I'll pass over to our consultants.
Great. Well, thank you for having us. So we have been working with city staff over the course of this year on the 2019 Development Charges Background Study. I'm just going to deliver a brief presentation on our process and methodology, the DC rates that are being brought forward, and some sort of policy considerations. Might be a bit of a repeat of my colleague Stefan's presentation back in October 21st, I believe, but we're just reiterating those points in this public meeting format. So what are development charges? They are fees imposed on development to fund growth-related capital costs. So DCs pay for new infrastructure and facilities to maintain service levels as the city grows. And the principle is that growth pays for growth and that those costs are not borne by the existing tax base. DCs are imposed by bylaw. Under the DC Act, the maximum life of a DC bylaw is 5 years after the day that it comes into force. The city's current DC bylaw actually does not expire until January 1st of 2023, but the city has initiated the study early on to align with the 3-year budget cycle. So the idea is that in future years, those timelines will be compressed and you'll undertake a DC study every 3 years or so. So prior to passing a bylaw, a city must undertake a background study as well as hold at least one public meeting, which is why we're here tonight, of course, and appeals are adjudicated at the LPAT. So just to run through the changes that are being brought forward through Bill 108, it sounds like there's a level of comfort with that already, so I won't spend too much time on it, but we're happy to answer any questions on Bill 108 and how that will affect your DC structure moving forward. So Bill 108, of course, received royal assent in June of 2019. And the draft regulations were released as well. There are still a lot of unknowns, so we are still waiting on some information in the finalized recommendations as well as the data proclamation. So there are still a lot of things that are up in the air there. Essentially, how Bill 108 affects your DC structure is that your soft services DCs or your discounted DCs, because those are the services that are currently subject to a 10% statutory deduction under the current DC Act. Those soft services or discounted DCs will move with parkland dedication and density bonusing under the Planning Act into this new community benefits charge regime under the Planning Act. So this currently does not affect the study that we're undertaking now. The CBC authority comes into force tentatively on January 1st of 2020. However, the prescribed end date for soft services DCs will be January 1st, 2021, or at least that's what's proposed right now. And municipalities can pass new hard and soft services DCs in 2019. So that's what we're doing now, and you will continue to be able to collect for all of your services at least until 2021. The DC background study was released on October 17th of 2019. There is a legislated 60-day time period that you need at minimum before bylaw passage for that public consultation period. So our target will be to pass the bylaw on December 16th. The study represents the maximum permissible DC rates, and it also represents a uniform continuation of your uniform citywide approach. As I believe was discussed back in October, that approach has received support from staff, stakeholders, as well as council. So we are moving forward with that. Just a little bit of background on our process. We start with a development forecast. So we work with staff to come up with a forecast of the type and location of development. So that's kind of used to set your needs for the future. We also work with staff to calculate 10-year historical service levels. Under the DC Act, those are used to set a funding level cap for what can be included in your DC study. We then, again, work with staff to identify your growth-related capital needs. In this case, we're really leaning on the 10-year capital plan, of course. From there, we deduct any non-DC eligible shares, so your grants or other contributions, the 10% service discount for those soft services, any benefit to existing or replacement shares of projects that are not growth-related, any available DC reserves, as well as any benefit to development that's expected to occur beyond the planning horizon that we're looking at. So that leaves us with our costs that are eligible for DC recovery, and we translate that using our development forecast into a residential per unit charge as well as a non-residential charge per square meter of GFA. So our development forecast, just really quickly, this was shown to council on October 21st as well. We're looking at 2 time horizons here for the any of the non-engineered services. We're looking at a 10-year time horizon from 2020 to 2029, and for the engineered services, we're looking to 2041. So the important thing here is that we're using the region's moderate growth forecast, which is essentially the provincial growth plan's 2031 targets stretched out to 2041, which kind of reflects better your recent growth patterns. It's a bit more realistic, and it also aligns really well with your transportation master plans and your water and wastewater servicing plans. And just to note that further details included in Appendix A of the study, and I believe in the staff report as well. And then just moving right into the capital programs. So these were compiled with city staff. They're primarily based on the 10-year capital plans and your master servicing plans. And we have worked with stakeholders as well on reviewing the projects and the timing. Council must express its intent to carry out the works in order for them to be included in the DC study. So that's an important point to note. And of course, as I've mentioned, our capital costs are adjusted in accordance with the DC legislation. So just a really brief overview of our capital programs. So these are the discounted services capital programs, the totals that we're looking at. So these are the services that will no longer be DC eligible under Bill 108. So after 2021, those will move to the CBC regime. The biggest piece here, of course, is your parks and major indoor recreation facilities. You're looking at a gross of about 56 million. We then deduct just over 4 million in grants and subsidies. We have a benefit to existing share of 16 million, your 10% legislated reduction. We deduct your 2 million in existing reserves for that service. There's no post-period benefit because we have not hit that service level cap that I mentioned, and that brings your total DC eligible cost down to 30 million. So that's kind of the process that we take, and we've taken that process for those other services listed here. Your non-discounted services will continue to fall under the DC Act, regardless of Bill 108. And here, so we have your engineered services, roads, water, wastewater, stormwater, engineering studies, as well as your fire protection and public works and fleet. So the biggest components here, unsurprisingly, are your roads and related and water and wastewater services. So just getting right into the rates now, we're looking at quite a minimal change in your current rate for single and semi-detached units. Our calculated rate is just about $15,800, which is a bit lower than your current rate of $15,880. And that charge is primarily made up of the parks and major indoor recreation facilities projects. as well as those engineered services components. The other services make up a smaller share. We also have listed here all of the calculated charges for the various types of residential units. So those vary based off of your typical occupancy rates of those units. So you have your multiple rate calculated at 10,300, and then you have various apartment rates, which are scaled to the number of bedrooms. And on the non-residential side as well, not too much of a change. And again, we're looking at a bit of a decrease, which I think was discussed in October as well. Here, we're looking at a much greater share related to the engineered services because things like parks and recreation and library are only associated with the residential population. So back in October, we were asked to look at some alternatives for your apartment rate structure. So currently you do have quite a nuanced apartment charge. And it is a bit unique. It is a bit more complex than most municipalities. However, it reflects your unique situation. You have a lot of students here, and you are still getting quite a lot of those larger 4 or 5 bedroom apartments. So we do feel like that still aligns with your with the service levels of each of those types of units. Important to note, there might be a bit of a risk with moving towards a different rate structure. Because we are looking at that equity and fairness issue, and that could easily be seen as, something that is you don't want to appear like you're subsidizing certain types of units with others. And then just to conclude, our draft bylaw was released on November 1st. Not too many changes in terms of policy in the draft bylaw, mostly just administrative and housekeeping items. It'll be considered on the 16th of December, and the plan is that the new rates will take effect on the 31st of December. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Julia. Questions from Council? Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Henry. So I asked a question earlier this afternoon with regard to our asset management plan when it came through, and so I guess it's kind of a question for all staff, not just our asset management team, but I just want to make sure we kind of have one shot at this in terms of getting this stuff done before we figure out what's going to really happen at the province. And I just want to make sure that the rehabilitated assets that we've accounted for in the DCs is the right number, that we have enough money there to open up the growth, in particular, I think, of the uptown. I mean, I'm asking the question, is there enough in the bucket? Have we looked at the land that is currently open for development for increased height and density throughout the city, looked at the life cycle of that asset that supports that, and thought about whether or not we're going to be able to open up that land?
So as part of the DC process, I went through that pretty quickly, so I didn't really get into it, but we are required to undertake an asset management plan. So we did work with staff in that area on looking at the potential life cycle costs of the assets that are included in the capital programs and making sure that those are reasonable to be supported by the future tax base, if that answers your question.
And since that's not Councillor Freeman's question, I'll go to Mr. Rapp for additional information.
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Freeman. The study would have taken into account the existing master plans that have been completed, which should have addressed future growth scenarios. The 2 studies that I think are still midstream, and every 10 years we do these, or 20 depending on the study, we still have the stormwater master plan to be completed in the first quarter of 2020, and the sanitary master plan to be completed in the third quarter of 2020. So the background study and the information that staff would have provided to the consultant would have been based on the previous studies that were conducted, but we'll continually be doing these updates So those two studies, when they're done, they'll go in the next version when we start reviewing it in 3 years and for a new bylaw in 4 years.
And more
If
from,
that answers your question,
and
Councillor
more from
Freeman.
Michael.
It does in some respect. I guess I guess just from my mind's eye, when we look at our asset management plan and we look at the assets that fall in that line of poor or, you know, a flaming mess, my gut instinct is that a lot of those assets possibly reside in older parts of the city, and that those older parts may also be areas that are targeted for increased height and density, and that, you know, we have an opportunity through these DCs to deal with some of that backlog because it is related to growth. And I just want to make sure we didn't miss it. That's one thing. The second piece is we know we have an I&I problem, right? Because every municipality does, which is infiltration in something or other, I forget. But it's basically when stormwater makes its way into the gray water pipes and we end up treating clean water, essentially, right? And so we know we have issues with that, and we know we have issues in those, again, in areas where we are looking for increased height and density. And I just want to make sure that we've got enough money in the DC bucket to deal with that. And that's all. Like, that's essentially my question.
I know Michael's been waiting. Michael?
So through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman. A couple points. So I heard your discussion this afternoon as well. So one thing we've included in our background study in our capital program is they're called what we call development-driven upgrades. So they're not tied to a specific project per se. We have certain roads that are identified, and we have a bucket of other monies for citywide development-driven upgrades, but more so for core area development-driven upgrades that we don't know what would happen and when. So we allocate money annually to these projects. And sometimes it piles up because we don't have line of sight to when that development may happen, but the money is there for these ones that may be not identified. So we have that bucket of money for roads and for underground infrastructure and stormwater. Secondly, we have a project on the sanitary sewer side. It's called optimization and rehabilitation. And in essence, it's a rehabilitation project that's going to be reclaiming some capacity. So it's to serve, you don't need to expand your pipes, so you're actually reusing some DC funding even though it's rehabilitation because you're reclaiming some capacity by reducing I&I. So we have that project in our sanitary sewer program as well in the outer years. And lastly, I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about the asset management plan and prioritizing, were you talking about prioritizing growth over rehab, or if we're talking about a road that's totally rehabilitation versus a road that's rehabilitation and upsize, are we prioritizing those at the same table? Is that kind of your question earlier this afternoon?
And I guess depending on where it's located, it might be both, right? So the example that I made reference to, we didn't have the robust asset management plan that we do now about, I want to say it was 10 years ago. And council said, you know, we've heard from the developers in the core, and there's no development applications coming in because there isn't enough capacity. And so, you know, we made investments. We twinned a sanitary, I think, and a storm in the downtown. We dealt with issues with flooding downstream in Jen's ward, and all of that was growth related. And in that particular case, I think we fronted the DCs knowing that it would get repaid once it happened, and that's all. I just don't want to miss anything because I just see this window that we have right now, and I don't know, like I don't know what the future holds, not just with Bill 108, but also with comments that say we'd like municipalities to shave 4% off their budgets. I don't even know where 4% comes from. So those are the things I'm worried about. We have this, we're opening this door. I just want to make sure that we got all the furniture in the house.
Through Councillor Henry to Councillor Freeman, while this won't give the highest level of confidence, we only know what we know today. And the twinning of the force main and other information that you referred to earlier that happened a decade ago, or give or take, that came from the previous sanitary master plan, sanitary services master plan, which identified those deficiencies in the core area and along University Avenue for Northdale and that area. So that was the study of that time, and council reacted and invested heavily in those areas. So as these new master plans come out, they will tell us new information, and then we will ask our council to respond, or the utility to respond accordingly with funding. But the other assurance I can give is the changes that are coming through that have been suggested by the province have been less impactful on the hard service component versus the soft service component. So there should be a little bit more comfort from that lens as well.
Michael has further information, and then we'll get to your follow-up.
Sorry, through you, Chair Henry. One more thing to add. We do have some capital projects for master plan implementation. So the stormwater master plan implementation, we've earmarked money through the forecast period, knowing that we'll have some projects to do. We just don't know what until those master plans are completed, as Cam had noted. So for sanitary sewer and stormwater, we both have DC money allotted, and rehabilitation money as well, if there are split projects in the budget for those.
And it's because I know we are losing all the money for the soft services that I want to make sure we got it all right for the stuff that we can ask money for. Because, you know, if we want to build community centers or whatever, it makes absolutely zero sense to me that the province would take that out of the opportunity, because I don't understand why they don't see that as a growth related support to our communities. And so that, you know, that's just, for me, it's even more important in my mind's eye to make sure that we have this component right.
The last Conservative government imposed a 10% soft services tax on existing residents, in effect, which is the deduction that's built in to begin with. Councillor Veith, so, you know, this is par for the course.
Through you, Chair Henry, just about the process here. So this report tonight is a formal public meeting, but it's update, like a bylaw update, and it says no significant change. So what does it mean by consideration of the bylaw December 16th? Is that when, like, what are we doing tonight? Are we not, because it's a formal public meeting, are we not?
We are certainly doing things tonight. We'll also do things in December. We'll hear more about what those are from...
Sorry, my name's Craig Binning. I'm a partner at Hempstead. Just to stress, this is the formal public meeting required under the Development Charges Act. It's not expected that council makes decisions at this meeting typically. And so it's really just to give the opportunity usually for the developers and stakeholders to also make deputations. But this evening, it doesn't appear that we have any here.
Oh, so everything must be okay.
Through the chair, if I could just clarify the one point with respect to the treatment of the discounted or the soft services. Just to be reassured that under Bill 108 and the proposed community benefits charges under the Planning Act, the minister has said that they will be revenue neutral. I've been part of the technical committee working with the province, and I've seen some of the ideas around how that is going to be, and we've been using information and data that you have provided, particularly your staff and other municipalities, to ensure the rigor of that percentage will give us that new revenue neutrality, so that you'll be able to still have money to acquire parkland, to develop that parkland, and to build your community centers. I'm disappointed we haven't seen the regulations formally yet, and I hope it happens soon.
I think that would be of great assistance. Before I go to Councillor Bodley, the decision point that is before us, because Council, I suggested Council do this, but Council raised perhaps a different calculation around apartments by bedroom type. That work has been done. Direction to staff and the consultant is part of the decision before us tonight, so they can write the correct bylaw. That's what that is. Councillor Bodley.
So thank you, through you, excuse me, through you, Chair Henry. Yeah, it's too late. And I hesitate to continue to talk about bedrooms at this late time, lest I want to be in mine. But nevertheless, I'm wondering if the consultants can give some feedback. You had talked about how the city of Waterloo is in a unique position with respect to offering the three different rates for 1 bedroom, 2 and 3, and 4 bedrooms. And that's going to be part of the conversation that I think we're going to be having around the horseshoe here shortly. And I guess my question is, do you continue to think that we are in a unique position vis-a-vis the rest of the market and need to continue to offer these 3 rates? And why? I'm just curious about your position on that.
Yes, thank you. And through the chair, and Julia and I chatted about this before, and I offered to deal with this issue because it's somewhat complex. You're not completely unique in having multiple categories within the apartment beyond the typical is the 2, a small and a large. There are other jurisdictions that do have 3 groupings within the apartments and even within the multiple categories. And so my understanding is that historically it's been structured this way because of those larger 4+ bedrooms that you do have attracted historically. The sense is that category is diminishing over time, and you're moving to more the traditional formats of the 2 and 3 bedrooms and not something significantly larger. The one thing, and the way that we've structured and done this analysis is reflective of the average occupancy by these types of units for newly constructed units based on a special run that we get from Stats Canada. So obviously, as we collapse groupings and change the groupings, we regroup that data. And as Julia indicated in her overview, it does end up resulting in winners and losers. Some types of units will pay more or less depending upon the structure of what you actually implement. And this is where I would like to give one caution to council at this time. One of the other jurisdictions that did have multiple categories, more than 2 within the apartments, is Halton Region. And Halton Region and their bylaw back in, I'm going to say 2014, sought to reduce it down to 1 category. That was appealed to what was then the OMB, and the defense that the region gave, they were not a client of ours, was that they were doing it for administrative purposes, and the developers of apartment units challenged that and said that administratively should not be a barrier, that what they were actually doing by collapsing it down to 1 category was creating a cross-subsidization, and that the region had shown historically that they had the ability to differentiate the rate, and that historically they saw that it had merit to differentiate the rate because it created a better nexus between the categories of the differentiation of the units. So, and the board upheld the appeal on that and required the region to go back to multiple categories within the apartments down to the 3-unit breakdown. So there is that, although the OMB or LPAT doesn't formally have precedence, it was written by a senior member of the board, and that certainly carries a certain amount of weight. And Stefan may not have expressed this last time to you, but I'm giving a certain level of caution that if you do move down to certainly a single rate, I think there will definitely be some challenge, and I think one of the submissions you've received from the stakeholders has expressed some concern about that. And if even going to the 2 categories may invite one of your apartment or your apartment developers to challenge that, because clearly it results in the small and the medium-sized unit rates potentially being higher than what they would have been otherwise. So I'm not sure if that answered the question or gave you more information than you wanted.
Just a quick follow-up, just given, and this may be to staff, so given the urgency behind passing this, so vis-a-vis the issues related to the community benefits charge, the urgency that we have to pass this by the end of December, does any sort of appeal have any impact on that? Or as long as we've passed the bylaw before December 31st, everything is good, whether we are appealed on this decision or not?
Yes, through the chair, I'd be happy to. Once you pass the bylaw, the new rates are in effect from the effective date of that. If there is appeal, you continue to collect those. If an appeal is successful, then you need to, and the charge is reduced or modified, you need to give refunds.
just like the fun we have with MPAC and challenges to those. Okay. Further questions from Councillor Freeman?
Having read the comments that we did receive from developers, can you just help me to understand this 15% cap or something? Like, what was that? What were they asking us on? That there was some rate in the uptown. Was it only Parkland? Oh, I thought it was also this, because the one letter I thought it made reference to DC's too. Okay, good. That's good, because when the Parkland came along, I thought it was that, and then, okay, good.
That letter was in support of continuing our existing exemption, which council did earlier, difference, which we did earlier this evening. Okay, I think that exhausts the question before we get something on the floor to have a conversation. Mayor, you have a motion?
Yes, I would move it with option E.
Look for a seconder, and then we can enter into conversation. Seconded by Councillor Bonagora. Mayor, do you have some opening remarks as the mover of the motion?
I do. I think that, if you look at some of the things that we've been challenged with over the prior terms of council, probably prior to my arriving here, certainly we were getting a lot of 5-bedroom dorm-style, purpose-built student housing units, and we saw them convert some of them to condos. We saw what the rents they're charging, and the rents were between $3,000 and $3,500 for these 5-bedroom units. So, no means affordable, no way families are going to get in there, purpose-built with locks on rooms, so purpose-built for students. We created this 4+ bedroom category to potentially dissuade that. What we've been finding, I think, in last term of council and this term of council, we're really seeing not a lot of family apartments being created, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and it would seem to make sense if we look at the 2 rates that we see on the screen there, that if you build anything up to 3 bedrooms, that you pay 1 rate, and we still dissuade people from building the dorm style, student warehousing type of rooms or type of apartments that we know that we don't want here. And that is it'd be nice to have a single rate, but if you take a look at the single rate there, you'll see it's $93.64. It's actually more than the 1, 2, 3 bedroom rate that we'd be approving tonight. So it really keeps the things in check there. Although you might see certainly the smaller ones, the 1 bedroom or less, go up. You're going to see the amount that we're charging for 2 and 3 bedrooms, family style, to come down. And the one question I had of staff, I noticed some of the options there say 1 bedroom or less versus option E just says 1 to 3 bedrooms, and just does the 1 to 3 bedrooms or less have to be encapsulated in there?
Sorry, no, through you, Chair Henry, that's just, it would be anything under 3 beds, so it would include a bachelor or 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, and then a 4+.
Okay, thank you.
Better language in the final written bylaw, I'm sure that Steve would have made sure is all good.
Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Further debate, including any questions? Councillor Hanmer, I saw the hand up.
Thank you. Mine's more a question, and I may be being really technical. You're moving, through you to the mayor, you're moving all 3 of the recommendations?
I heard a motion for all 3 recommendations.
Correct.
The third one, you have to pick one of the
Okay.
5 bullets in the mayor's
the first one, more a technicality. I'm not real comfortable approving the report because it contains the draft bylaw. And if we're coming back to talk about the bylaw, it's Appendix A. So if we're approving the report, technically we would be approving the bylaw. I would feel more comfortable if the very first one said that we received the report and then go through with the rest, unless I'm missing something totally.
I look to the clerk for clarity on all things procedure.
Through the chair to Councillor Hamner, the bylaw actually has to go through readings to be approved. So the bylaw that's in the report is just for information. That's all. You're not approving the bylaw.
With that answered, is there further debate on the mayor's motion? Seeing Councillor Bodley.
I guess I'm, excuse me, I'm just thinking about what we would be incentivizing here, and it seems to me that I understand the mayor's point around the 4+ bedrooms, and so I definitely see the advantage of having that as a separate sort of rate. But I guess, is this, my question is, I guess maybe for staff or maybe just broadly for council, is do we feel like in the city of Waterloo we do not have enough 2 and 3 bedroom apartments and we have plenty of 1 bedroom apartments? Because that would be sort of what would lead me towards the mayor's motion in option E. And I wonder if there's any commentary from staff or from council about whether that is true.
I think I'd look to Mr. Rapp. Councillors may have their own opinion, but I'll look to Mr. Rapp.
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Bodley, we've seen within the last 2 years a trend. The pendulum has swung from the 5s to the 1s, to be honest. That's what we're seeing. If there was a predominant unit type, it would be the 1 bedroom over and above anything else.
And Michael?
So just one thing to add through your Chair Henry to Councillor Bodley. So these rates are just the city development charges. So the regional development charges on top of the charge as well as educational development charges. So when you look at the development charge for the region for an apartment, they have 1 single rate, which is upper tier, it's 15,278. So that's the same regardless of the number of bedrooms. So it's really just the difference of about $1,000 or $2,000 on a charge of about anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000 that would be impacted. So when you talk about materiality or the context of the charge, that's kind of what you have to look at, because it's not just the $5,000 they're paying or the $8,000 or $10,000. It's plus the regional plus the education, which is the same regardless of the number of units.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Michael.
Other comments or questions on the motion on the floor? I'm seeing lots of contemplation. Councillor Bonagor?
Through you, Chair Henry, I think I'd just like some kind of clarity that, so the mayor has put forward option E, which for 4 plus bedrooms, you've got 19,000 plus with the development charge. But I'm assuming that, because sometimes supportive housing and things like that are built in that kind of form. So would they then, if someone were to come with us with an aged care facility that has that kind of bedrooms with a shared central area, or supportive housing with a shared central area and bedrooms, would there be other potential exemptions for them to look at? I'm just saying that 4 and 5 bedroom, that it's not always student housing.
Mr. Rapp?
I'm not as familiar with the new bylaw, and perhaps I can be corrected, but we used to also have a boarding house definition. So depending on the unit structure and access to facilities and things like that, there would also be that. But if it is deemed affordable, they pay based on whatever the unit class is, unless they come to council and ask for council to pay for it for them.
And I note that councils that I've been a part of, and the one prior, every time there has been a, the region would call it community housing, application that's come forward, council has paid its DCs for every single one of those units. And we found various funding at various times. And at some point it would be useful to have a program, but at the moment we've just found various funds at various times from various places. So we've dealt with those when they've come. Sounds like this council probably would as well. Further debate? Seeing none, I'll get ready to call the vote, and I'll simply say thank you, Mayor, for moving the option I suggested get looked at and stating the reasons as the reasons why I wanted us to look at it. So there's that. All those in favor? That's carried. Notice of motion, thank goodness we have no more. Communications and correspondence, we have none. Regional information and correspondence, there is none. Unfinished business, we dealt with it all. New business, is there other business, council? Seeing none, are there questions, council? Seeing none, is there a mover for adjournment? I see Councillor Hanmer and Councillor Freeman. All those in favor, we stand adjourned.